Sure.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is Margie Tatro with GridWorks, and I'm joined by my colleagues here, Jay Griffin and Deborah Shields, also from GridWorks. And we're pleased to be hosting this meeting number 4 on stakeholder engagement regarding the 20-year integrated resource plan for Southwestern Public Service. It's July 6th of 2023. And we are recording this meeting for the benefit of those who can't be here, and also for anyone who would like to review materials that are presented at your own pace. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with the next slide. Our plan today is to focus on preparing the stakeholders to provide input to the action plan. Deb, I think go back one slide. Is there? Yeah, thank you. So our purpose is to prepare all of the stakeholders to be able to provide input to the action plan in August, and all the activities that are leading up to that, including conversation about the statement of need input and conversation about the modeling activities, are all supporting that objective for August in the action plan discussion. Some key outcomes for today's meeting. First of all, we have an announcement consistent with the IRP rule to identify if anyone is going to request access to the same modeling software that's being used by SPS. We will ask for you to notify us by the close of business today if you are intending to do that. There are some questions and some discussion we'd have to have with you if you wish to do that, so we need to know that today. We're also going to review the statement of need input and do a first check from all of you on things that we have consensus on, or more importantly, things that people do not feel like they can support that's in that statement of need document. We're going to review the draft modeling results from SPS's team and talk about the stakeholder requested runs, some that have come in, some that we're expecting to come in, and we'll ask Ben Elsie and the team from SPS to take conversations on those topics forward. And then finally, we want to have some conversation about the factors that are to be considered in evaluating resource portfolios. That is also a segment that is in the IRP rule, and you've heard discussion from the SPS team in past meetings about some of the considerations that they will take into account as they're moving to the most cost-effective and recommended portfolios. So that's our plan for today. The agenda that we've got on the next slide shows this welcome. Then we'll spend about an hour talking about the statement of need, and we're glad to have a committee that has, if you go back, Deb, let's go back up. Thanks. Please go to the agenda, please.
Yes.
The Statement of Need Interim Committee, also known as the SONIC, will be updating all of you on information that we have in the document that is the Statement of Need input document. We'll have the committee present the status of that document, and we'll take comments on that. After that, we've got time for SPS to present their draft model results and talk about next steps in that process. We'll take a 15-minute break at 3:15, give everyone a chance to stretch, grab a beverage, do whatever's necessary to come back, and then we'll handle questions and answers from the modeling results information through a process that Jay Griffin will manage, and using the chat buttons as well. Then we have time for the conversation about stakeholder requested modeling runs, and then factors to consider in evaluating the resource portfolio. At the end, we'll do a summary of next steps. We will again launch and strongly encourage you to give us feedback through the electronic survey. We're using this information not only to provide context for the New Mexico PRC in our final report about how effective the process is. Plus, we use your information to increase the effectiveness of our facilitation through these meetings. So it's very important we get your input. We'll adjourn by 5 p.m. So the next slide really is a welcome to any new stakeholders who are here today. We would ask that if you are new to our process and new to these meetings, please go to the chat. Deb, can you go to the next slide? There, great. If this is your first meeting, please go into the chat and enter your name, your organization, your email address, and your primary topic of interest related to the IRP. We use this information to help design our stakeholder meetings. And in a moment here, I'm actually going to do a quick roll call for the organizations, the people who have RSVP'd for this meeting, mostly so that you all know who the other stakeholders are who are on the phone. Of course, we'll record the attendance through the Zoom resources and the tools, but we thought it was helpful for you all to know who's on the phone. Before I do that, also wanted to reinforce this announcement. Any stakeholder who desires access to the same modeling software as the utility as provided in the IRP rule, please notify us at info@gridworks.org today. We'll certainly use midnight as our closing time for today. And if you have questions about that, you can let us know that you have questions, but this is something that we wanted to ask formally of all the stakeholders. So please let us know if that is your desire and plan. So I'm going to quickly go through the organizations of stakeholders who we had RSVPs from for this meeting and ask you just simply to either come on the camera and wave when we say your name or come off mute and say hello, just so that we know that you're here and so that the other stakeholders can associate a face or name with your presence. So I'm going to run down this fairly quickly. I won't take the time to introduce our fabulous SPS team members who are on the line, but please know that we do have a significant capability and expertise from the SPS team that is here today. So let me ask Mr. Michael Suazo from Betty and Wozniak PC. Are you here? Miguel, are you here? All right, I don't know. How about Brenda Crockett or Michael Palm from Chevron? Sam Cobb from the City of Hobbs.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Welcome, glad you're here. Wesley Hopper from the City of Jow. Kara Lynch, I saw Kara in the chat. Kara, welcome, glad you're here.
Thank you.
Athena Christodoulou from Seasol Power. Athena, are you here today? Okay, Lance Pyle from Curry County. Mr. Pyle, are you here? Tim Hawk from Devon Energy. Devon Energy, Mr. Tim Hawk. How about Mr. Mike Andrade from the IBEW 6602 representatives? Mike Andrade, are you here? How about Scott Lopez from Kelly Cable of New Mexico? Mr. Robert Barber from the Lincoln County Land and Natural Resource Advisory Council. Robert, are you here? How about Mark Bibot from Los Alamos National Laboratory? Mark, are you joining us today? How about RJ McIntosh from MAD Energy? RJ, are you here? How about Jim Desjardins from the New Mexico Renewable Industries Association? Jim, are you here?
I am here and glad to be so. Thank you,
Great.
everyone.
Thanks, Jim. From the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, I believe we have Agatha, Bamadou, Ed, Edison, Naomi, Russell, and Cynthia Mitchell. Did I miss any folks from the PRC?
Mark Tuffler from the PRC is here.
Hi, Mark.
Also, Mackley Carroll from the PRC is here.
Hi, welcome.
And
Thank you.
Cynthia Mitchell, PRC consultant, is here.
Thank you. How about Daniel Zamora from Quay County? Looks like we might have two representatives from New Mexico Renewable Energy Transmission Authority, Fernando Martinez and/or Chris Heyer. Fernando or Chris, you here? How about Michael Kenny from SWEEP? Michael, are you here?
Yes, I am here.
Great, thanks. Welcome. Vincent DiCosimo from Targa Resources. Vincent, are you here? How about Jocelyn Barrett Capin from Walmart? Jocelyn, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Are you here? Scott Young from Wärtsilä North America. Scott Young. Aaron Gould from Western Resource Advocates. Aaron, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Terrific. Those are the people, in addition to our SPS team, those are the people that we had as the RSVP as of yesterday. And I imagine we have some additional introductions in the chat. Quickly, we have Susan Miller. Thank you for being here, Susan. Mark, you're here. Great, thank you. Okay, fabulous. Thank you for entertaining that. We just thought it was helpful for you all to know who's in the room, even though it's a virtual room. So with that, thank you for the introductions in email, in the chat for those of you who are new. Let me move on to the next slide to get everyone oriented to where we've come in this process. As many of you know, we started in May, really May and June, in getting ourselves grounded in understanding the SPS system. Thanks to some excellent presentations by SPS, we're all increasing our knowledge and coming up to speed. We spent some time talking about the statement of need and preparing for modeling. Now in July and August, the focus really is on the significant modeling efforts and also advancing the group's input to the statement of need, so that when we get to our August timeframe, we will be able to put together an action plan that is supported and discussed by this group. Of course, that we believe that not everything that we put together will be a consensus, but we are collecting all the input from the stakeholders so that the utility SPS can consider that as they're putting together their plan. And if you go back one slide, please, Deb, what you can see, what's left for us in September through October is that we have a meeting scheduled in September. That will be the last meeting before the utility files their plan with the commission in mid-October. And then on the 26th, we will get this group back together to hear your comments on how did the process work or not work for you, because that is one of our key deliverables to the PRC this year is how did this process work? What are best practices? What's some things that should be considered in the future? So that's where we're headed. We're on July 6th, meeting number 4. We'll talk some more when we finish this meeting about our next steps and the next meeting, which is the beginning of August. And we'll give you some details about that when we get to the end of the meeting. So with that, let's go to our first topic of substance, and that's the statement of need. And as many of you know, the stakeholders are encouraged and supported to provide input to the statement of need, which is part of the integrated resource plan that the utility will write and prepare. And we have a group that got together in Roswell in June to start to craft the outline or the topics that might go into that list of input to the statement of need. And the group has been working since then. Deb, can we go to the next slide, please? The group has been working not only since Roswell, but in the interim to put together some more substance to the statement of need document. So I'd like to first give appreciation to Jim Desjardins, Austin Jensen, Karen Bueller, Zoe Leese, and also Matt Larson, who have been really advancing this conversation over the past few weeks. What we're going to do now is ask Jim Desjardins and any of the folks supporting him on this call to walk through the document, which was available to you all as a read ahead document. And Deb can put in the chat the link to our GridWorks site where this document is located. I'll bring it up on screen so Jim can walk through what it looks like currently. And then after he does that, we'd like to ask you all to provide your feedback. Specifically, are there things that you don't agree with that are in this input list? And also, if you have any comments, edits, questions, etc., please put those in the chat today or email those to me by July 20th so that we can incorporate that information into a document that we will ask all of you to comment on in August when we get back together, with the key being we'll check our level of consensus during that August 1st and 2nd meeting. So that's what we're going to do next here. Let me pause, Jim, before we have you come on and ask if there are questions about anything we've covered to date. I probably should have paused before introducing this topic, but are there questions either of the statement of need, interim committee process, or any of the other materials that I've already presented that you have questions about? Please raise your hand or just come off mute and ask a question at this point if you have one. Okay, hearing none, Jim, I'm going to share my screen and give you the floor to present where the group is in terms of the current statement of need.
Okay, I'm just waiting to see the screen because all I see are people right now.
Okay, hold on just a minute. Yeah.
That's okay. I'm ready.
I'm going to get it here. Can you see it, Jim?
We can see it. I think it needs to be bigger. I have my own printed copy in front of me, so I'm fine. But I don't know if others can see what's on the screen. It's kind of small.
How's that?
I think that's looking better. So anyways, let me just, now we're looking better. So my name is Jim Desjardins with the Renewable Energy Industries Association of New Mexico. And I either volunteered or was volunteered to kind of tee this off. And I will have help from others on the call, and I'm looking forward to doing it. So this is, to start it off, we basically have, obviously what it says is when it comes to procurement, technical characteristics of resources should be considered. So of course, cost is obviously always something very important, but also what's very important is that we have the best value. And that kind of leads into some of the other things we have here: capacity, contribution of resources, whether they're dispatchable, the location of the resources. We want to look at emerging technologies to make sure that we have the best fit for our resources. And this is very interesting: effective resources on SAIDI, SAFI, NERC, and WEC. So let me just go through those. SAIDI is System Average Interruption Duration Index. SAFI, System Average Interruption Duration. NERC, I actually know, North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and WEC is Western Electricity Coordinating Council. So I hope everyone is very familiar with those. The objectives we're trying to solve for, and there's a whole laundry list of them. Again, cost-effective resource portfolio, and just like anything else in life, we want things to be cost-effective. We need to meet our RPS requirements. So the RPS requirements are 40% by 2025. That's for renewable energy. That's right around the corner. 50% by 2030, 80% by 2040. That's going to be very interesting to see how we get there. We need to meet the projected load growth and secure replacement energy and capacity for retiring. And what's interesting about SPS is they have a lot of resources that are going to be retiring very soon. So not only do we need to go to new types of generation, primarily renewables, but we need to deal with the retiring resources as well. Reliability and resiliency, I think that's something that everyone agrees is very important. We need to keep the lights on. And of course, there can be bad consequences when they're not. We can look back to what happened in Texas a couple of years ago to note what happened there. Robust energy helps to provide economic development. Now, we had a little discussion on this because not everyone might be on the same page on what is good or bad for economic development, but I think that's something that most people are going to view favorably. We need to meet the evolving resource adequacy requirements, and we have some more about this later on. Affordability is a big deal because how do we make energy affordable to all these different types of people and companies, et cetera? And that's particularly interesting where we have a lot of the energy being used by oil and gas companies in the southeast part of the state. Providing a just and orderly transition. And this is a topic that's been discussed a lot as we transition our energy grid to renewable sources. And we want to try to make sure that as many people are on board and can participate as possible. Engaging customers to help the utility reliably to serve during grid constraint events. And as many folks know, there was a situation in California, it was like a couple years ago around Labor Day, and the governor sent a text out, please reduce your energy usage immediately. And guess what? About 4% of the population did. So that's pretty cool. There are resource needs by 2027 that are currently being addressed by the 2021 IRP action plan. There's a lot of blanks in here on megawatts and base case and scenario. And I think at this point, I'm going to call upon Ben or other folks to maybe dive into the next two bullet points.
Or perhaps Zoe, do you want to comment on these two large bullets and note the relationship with the modeling? Is that something, Zoe, you can explain for the...
At its core, the statement of need is going to be an identification of our megawatt need by a time frame, and that will also what that looks like, what those megawatts look like in terms of generation will be informed by the modeling taking place. So we have an outline here to start filling in once the modeling, once we start seeing the modeling that identifies our megawatts that are needed, and then we can also start filling in the potential, what the potential portfolio can look like based on modeling that's taking place with the modeling group. Jim, did I miss anything?
I'm sure you got it all.
I'm sure someone will jump in if I miss something.
So I'm assuming it.
James,
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
this is James Hall, ExxonMobil. I just have a question about that. That the way that's written is sort of as if it's mutually exclusive, that you have megawatts from clean energy and megawatts from dispatchable. But if we're going down a hydrogen route or a CCS route where you have low carbon dispatchable energy, I just wondered if that had been sort of considered.
I think we can certainly, that's a really good point, James, that we can add to the list. I don't know who's owning the list, but in terms of stakeholder input and what other bullet points should be under that, I think we certainly can add that. Margie, are you sharing your screen? I don't know who's owning this document right now.
Yeah, I'm sharing it. I'm not capturing. We're gonna we encourage you to put any of your comments in the chat. James, I think
Absolutely.
that was a good one, that there's some resources that satisfy multiple of these sub bullets. So I think let's capture that in the chat, and then Zoe, my plan is not to try to edit this real time right now, but to take the input and incorporate it so that in the next conversation amongst the interim committee or others, we've captured the feedback from today's meeting.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Any other comments or questions so far, folks? All right, well, I'm going to keep moving down the list. So this goes on to page 2. Ultimate portfolio depends on bids submitted and received. So obviously, SPS doesn't have that much control over what kind of bids they're going to get. They can put out an RFP, but ultimately it's in the hands of who's responding to that. Rules, law, state law compliance. So we need to be in compliance with state and federal laws, et cetera. That goes without saying. Timeline considerations. One of the things that I learned when I was in Roswell, and Ben, I think this was you who said this, so correct me if I'm wrong, it takes on average like 5.5 to 6 years to get a big new generator online, because you have to go through regulatory, you have to, do the planning, get bids, and then it actually also has to be built and tested. So that's something we need to take in consideration. When we're talking about transmission interconnection, this is another thing that's interesting about SPS, is that they have this thing called SPP, Southwest Power Pole, that they're part of. So it adds a whole nother layer of regulatory and other conditions that they need to adhere to. So that's something they need to take in consideration. And then there's a bullet point on here. And I think this is an important one from my perspective. It takes less time to get smaller resources online. So, there's a place obviously for big resources, but we need to look at smaller resources as well. So that could be something like behind the meter solar on a home or business, or even community solar. Moving on to reliability. And again, anyone have any questions, just jump on in. And for the people with SPS, please jump in if you feel we need to clarify something. So reliability, so time frame to come online is important. So PRM, and so another acronym we got here, planning reserve margin. So I kind of look at it like the extra stuff you have on hand for a rainy day, sort of like a savings account, or maybe emergency food supply. But this is the stuff that they need, the generation that they need to have in case of a very extreme event that they might not ordinarily plan for. And by the way, their planning reserve margin is higher than I believe a couple of the other IOUs in New Mexico, because they belong to the Southwest Power Pole, and I believe that just went up as well. So that's a unique factor in their situation. Okay, more infrastructure. We're going to need investment in distribution and transmission assets to support new generation. So while SPS doesn't have this problem, there's another utility in the state that has anywhere from 16 to 19 distribution lines that are closed to behind the meter solar. So these are things that we need to take into consideration. Location considerations. So, and I think this is pretty much a given, that the closer the generator is to where the load is. So the closer we have it to where you use it, the better it is. There's less energy loss in transmission lines. There's just less cost involved. And as someone who's represents companies that do behind the meter solar, that's obviously an argument that we use, is like our generator is right there. So, but yes, so we want to be as close as possible. Another interesting thing here, larger facilities could encounter land use conflicts, et cetera. So there's an issue that's affecting the renewable energy business more and more, is NIMBY, not in my backyard. And so as we do more and more build outs, this is becoming more of a issue that needs to be dealt with. And I think it's going to be even more so in the future. And by the way, obviously a way to address some of that is to do smaller and medium-sized resources, do build outs in the built environment where there's already stuff built. It says here RFP results will consider location. So when SPS is evaluating a RFP response, part of that is going to be location, as it should be. We need to address transmission infrastructure, needed to integrate more renewables. So, I mean, in fact, I was on a call earlier today with NM Rita. And by the way, they're doing a big storage conference in the fall. That sounds really exciting. And so they're, as a lot of people know, they're in the middle of doing a lot of big transmission, and that's very exciting, but it takes a long time. It took 15 years just to get SunZia approved before they could even start building it, which I guess the building they just started. System analysis for inadequate load supply. So I find this interesting. My interpretation of this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but how do we decide who gets the lights turned out? So in other words, if our load exceeds our supply, we need to do something, because they can only be they can be just a little out of sync, and then bad things happen. So if load exceeds the amount of generation, you need to shed load. And so there's a decision point of how that's done. And Ben, maybe you or someone else might want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, Jim, I'm not sure I have that order operation on me. We can certainly look it up and present it at a future meeting.
Okay. Yeah, I've always been curious, like how does that happen? Okay, so any questions from anyone so far on anything here? I'm going kind of fast, but I'm trying to make sure we use the best of our time. Okay, well, I'm just going to keep moving down. We're about halfway through. More generation. So we need to make individual solar more affordable, and I'm all for that. And by the way, the Inflation Reduction Act did address some of that, but there's more work to be done there. Athena, or is Athena on the call? I think she didn't respond, but if you're on the call, there's something here that says no regret. And then it says, Athena, please elaborate.
I'm here in the dark.
Okay.
Hi, thank you.
Please elaborate.
Yes, there's no sense in putting different resources out there, generation resources that emit fossil fuel emissions, because we have a climate crisis happening, and it's worse than we thought. We need to decrease our fossil fuel emissions, especially in the electric generation, because you're talking about a single person, a single entity, rather than thousands of drivers of cars. And so we need to see, what if the new clean power plan that Biden is trying to get enacted of clean electricity by 2035, or for energy, for actually social equity 2030. We got to push it hard. We waited too long. We could have been on a bunny slope. Now we got to be on a black diamond. So I'm putting a link in the chat for.
I think we just lost you, Athena.
Athena, you just went on to mute. Come back and finish. Thank you.
I did. I just put something in the chat that explains a little bit what we're facing, and I hope you enjoy the charts. And that's the most thing. We don't want to have maybe more gas on thinking that carbon sequestration works, which if it also took care of upstream emissions, fine. Then maybe consider it. But we don't want to be putting things on that aren't going to necessarily work, aren't necessarily going to be efficient, aren't necessarily going to be clean. So that's why.
All right. Thank you, Athena. Again, Athena had something in the chat there, and I think she's saying push it hard, and we don't want to put new resources in there that we wish we had not. So segmenting to most economic and reliable portfolio. So that's, I guess, kind of the essence of what we're doing here. And so I just have put a little note there. How do we determine? And so, you know, the devil's in the details, and, you know, garbage in, garbage out, and all that other kind of stuff about statistics. Life cycle, environmental cost considerations, including just decommissioning costs. And so I can tell you, representing the organization that I represent, this issue is coming up more and more. I get a little defensive because yes, solar panels and batteries have stuff in there that come from places that are not super friendly United States, and there might not be the best labor practices to get them, and there can be toxic and everything else. But I would say that also is part of making automobiles and TV sets and iPhones and all kinds of other stuff. So it is something that as not only as a country, but globally, we need to look at, okay, when we make something, how do we make it with materials that are as friendly as possible and procured as friendly as possible, and then having a plan to get rid of it when it's no longer useful. So a cradle to grave concept, but that's an important concept that we're going to be looking at more and more. Incorporate evolving technology. So as we all know, in our lifetime, technologies have changed tremendously. We went from flip phones to iPhones and smartphones, and TV sets have changed, and cars have changed, and now they're electric. So we're only going to continue to have new technologies, and we need to just plan that the world is going to be changing, and we need to constantly be able to analyze how these technologies can help us. Maximize investment opportunities. How to measure the benefits of these investments is challenging. So I think part of this concept is it's not just by dollars. We need to look at other ways that we can analyze investments, and if they're good investments or not. We need to look at different timeframes. A nice bullet point here: support a diversity of businesses that support New Mexico's economy. Here's an interesting bullet point: cost effective, including fuel, but then a lot of the investments we're talking about won't include fuel. So that's another thing we need to think about. Athena touched on the climate crisis, and I think it is notable. I think it was on TV this morning on the morning news that we just had the hottest day in the history of the world. That's very notable. So this is something we need to be concerned about. I do think we also need to understand, appreciate that the issue of climate change and the urgency, different people feel a different sense of urgency about that. So we need to be mindful of that. Transition, human impact. So, you know, I think we have in here already, we had orderly and just transition, and I think that addresses this. We want to try to make this as a equitable and fair transition as possible when we go to renewable energy. Load growth. All right, I'm going to call on one of the other people on the team to talk about load growth on this one, and maybe I'll jump in at the end. Zoe, Ben, anyone?
I think this was just a placeholder the notes here kind of reflect what was discussed at the in-person meeting in Roswell, but a placeholder that load growth is being discussed by the modeling team, and that the statement of need also needs to address that there is significant load growth going on SPS's system.
Yeah, and Zoe, maybe I'll jump in there as well. I think it was Athena maybe mentioned earlier that, you know, the power industry is a major emitter of greenhouse gases. But obviously other industries, you know, contribute to greenhouse gases as well, transportation, you know, industrials. So we're not on this journey alone. Lots of other industries are on this journey of carbon reduction, which usually means electrification. So we're seeing huge load growth, especially in our commercial and industrial customers who are also looking at reducing their carbon footprint by electrifying their operations. So I think as we look at this, we need to just keep that, you know, in mind. You know, I think, you know, James presented some data during our last meeting that there's potential for huge load growth in the Permian Basin, and we need to just keep planning for that. We'll keep one eye on that for the future.
Thank you, Ben and Zoe. And one thing that was, I mean, I already knew this, but it was brought more to my attention when I was in Roswell, is that their load is, you know, is different than the rest of the state, and that they do have a lot of oil and gas operations that do use a lot of electricity in doing what they do. And so that their load growth is going to is projected to come more from that than maybe in other parts of the state where it might be electric vehicles and building electrification and other things. So that those last two items was less of a factor in their estimates for future load growth. Okay, so kind of moving through this. Okay, we're actually almost at the end. Here's something interesting. So there's talk here about real-time day-ahead pricing, tariff design, expose customers to market prices, such that customer will respond to change usage behavior. So I've been reading about that, and I think that's a really interesting concept. I think it might work for some of those large load customers, you know, that SPS has. I don't see how that, I think that would be a challenge for residential, but it's obviously something that needs to be talked about. And then on the last, at the top of page 4, we have one other item that I would just, well, there's a couple, future possible regulatory scenarios. So anyone who spends any time with the Public Regulation Commission knows they're dealing with a whole lot of very interesting topics and that they need to weigh in. And then the last item, it says behind the meter solar plus storage is tools for the utility to call upon to dispatch as needed. And I was on a call this morning talking about this and how they can be aggregated, and so that you could have a company that could then pull maybe 10,000 behind the meter solar systems with storage and have it set up so that a utility could literally call upon those to be dispatched all at once. So that's very interesting. There's pilots on that, I know, in California and New Hampshire. And then I was also told this morning that the parent company of SPS, Xcel Energy, is doing this in Minnesota. So that would be very interesting if that is the case, because that would enable SPS to learn from what their brothers up north are doing. That is the end of my, I don't know if I call it a presentation, but just a review of the stakeholder input to the statement of need for SPS IRP. Thank you very much for listening.
So Jim, great job. Thank you for going through the summary. Let me open it up to any of those folks who were present on this topic in Roswell or part of the Statement of Need Interim Committee. I see a couple of folks on the Zoom call that were participating. Thank you, Athena. Anything else you wanted to add? I also see Agatha and Edison from the PRC, and K-Bob from the industry there in the area. Those of you were all part of our conversation in Roswell and may not have had a chance to look through this latest version Karen Bueller is all. I don't see her on the line. And both of our friends, Austin and Austin from the New Mexico Large Customer Group. Is there any of that group on today that wanted to add any color or conversation about what Jim has presented?
Margie, this is Zoe. I just would like to add, if you can scroll down a little bit
Yep.
to the end of this page. Just a further comment on what James Hall had commented on this list at the bottom, maybe not being inclusive of all types of technology. I think this list will be informed by the modeling. So what ultimately comes out of the modeling with will be informing also what this list contains. So if there's not something there right now, that doesn't mean it's not going to be included.
Great, thanks, Zoe. And I think James's contribution also was there are solutions in here that meet more than one checkbox, right? So that ideally, if there are resources that are beneficial in multiple ways, there's no need we have to separate them. Many times they will satisfy a variety of these requirements from the same resource. So let me open up the conversation then to anybody. And I don't know, K-Bob, I know you had some great contributions when we were in Roswell. If there's anything you wanted to add before we open it up to the group to get some reactions. In particular, are there things on here that you really feel don't belong, you can't support? So let me first ask K-Bob if you wanted to add anything, and then we'll open up to the group to say, are there things on these pages that you feel like don't belong or that you can't support?
Yeah, this is K-Bob. No, I don't have anything further to add.
Okay. Thanks for your help and for giving us some resources, some other documents that we could draw upon. So we really appreciate that knowledge. So please speak up if there's something that you wanted to comment on, anybody on the phone. We're going to encourage you to also put your comment or question in the chat so that we can capture that and address it. So let me just pause and see what questions or comments come from anybody on the phone at this point.
So Margie, this is Ben. I'll maybe just add one comment. If you could go down and maybe on the next page. After. Maybe the next one. No, I'll have to. Okay, yeah, just on this, sorry, at the bottom of page 2 there. So just want to point out that some of these requirements or some of these needs are not necessarily going to be directly related. So we're going to have some issues. The most economic and reliable portfolio may not necessarily be the most cost-effective portfolio. So we've just got to concede that, there isn't going to be this, what I would call this unicorn portfolio, which happens to be the greenest, most reliable, and most economical. So again, just want to make the point, some of these requirements are going to be conflicting with one another, and we're going to have to obviously address that as the modeling starts to show the results.
Great, thanks, Ben. And that is also part of the reason for the topic during this meeting, where we're going to go through some of those factors that are considered in making that down select, and then thinking about how we can help the stakeholders through a process after today to give their input as to what are the most important factors to them collectively. So we'll talk some more about that when we get later in the meeting. So thank you for that. And Austin, I see you're on. Would you like to add some comment?
Yeah, I was going to add something that was actually kind of just captured by what you and Ben said, and that And by the way, Austin Rushoff with the New Mexico Large Customer Group, my colleague, Austin Jensen, somewhat confusing, helped put this together. We've been kind of talking back and forth, but what I think is interesting is this rather robust and multi-bullet pointed document contains a lot of interesting factors. But what it doesn't really do very much is prioritize factors. So I think once the modeling comes in, it's going to be kind of interesting to see, and Ben sort of just pointed to this, is, you know, there's many things we care about, but at what cost? So something just to pick something randomly, geographic diversity. I think that's important, but maybe not something we want to spend a whole lot of extra money to achieve. So while we've listed here a lot of interesting factors, I think it'll be interesting to see how we kind of prioritize and weigh those as the dollars and cents come in on some of the modeling and bids that are received.
Great, thanks, Austin. Yeah, I want to point out that it is ultimately the utilities' decision about how to select the recommended portfolios, and that we've been very impressed with the utilities' interest to hear what interest and ability in hearing what the stakeholders feel is important. We know that there's tremendous diversity in our stakeholder group, and we're going to do our best to capture those elements and those factors that are the most important to the stakeholders. And we know that the folks at the utility at SPS are also the ones that have to make the system work. And so they are certainly critical in doing that selection as well. So Kara, thanks. Yep.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up on a comment that Ben Elsey made. I think he said something like certain resources may be cost effective, but not the most economical. What does that mean?
No, I'm just saying that the portfolio of resources, not necessarily an individual resource, would likely not necessarily have all of those characteristics. In other words, let's pick on wind. You could build a portfolio that was 100% wind generation, and that in theory could be the most economic from an energy perspective. On a levelized cost of energy, wind could be the lowest cost, but wind alone wouldn't provide the reliability benefits that you need to operate your system. So as you start looking at trying to get the three kind of the factors, the three pillars we're looking for here, the three legs of the stool, we're looking for cost effective, we're looking for reliable, and we're looking for green. Excuse me. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Okay, I mean that, yeah, a robust portfolio is usually most reliable, but in your assessment, you'll also be looking at, I couldn't ascertain the difference between the cost effectiveness and most economical.
Oh, excuse me. And first of all, apologies for the mailman deciding to deliver a parcel just as this meeting was going on and set the dogs off. But in terms of most cost effective and economical, we kind of use those words, Cara, interchangeably. They're for the most part the same for this context.
Okay, thanks for elaborating.
And just so you know, we're going to get in kind of in the next presentation in looking at some preliminary modeling results. So I think maybe we can start talking about those qualifications during that presentation.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Any other comments on this document before I have Deb go back to the slide deck and review what our next steps on this are?
Marcia, I had one that I put in the chat. And when it goes to the section where the blanks are all in megawatts. That was just a question for the team based on, it's largely on our experience retiring plants here. We looked at replacement capacity and energy, and ancillary services. So was that kind of embedded in this concept, or I bring it up because we actually had to, we had to clarify this in dealing with our utility. They only looked at replacing capacity in megawatts, not looking at the impact and the full fuel replacement and energy replacement, and making sure the RFPs were specified for full replacement of all those attributes. So I just wanted to make sure that's not somehow lost here.
Somebody from the Sonic committee want to comment? I don't think we discussed that in the statement of need group. It was an oversight though, but Zoe or Matt, do you want to chime in there?
Probably jump in on this as well. I mean, we will be looking at energy and capacity as part of integrated resource plan modeling for Compass. But Ben, I don't know if you have something more you want to add to that point.
The only thing I'll add is maybe Jay stealing the part of my presentation come up next. I want to jump into kind of the energy and capacity need substantially in the modeling. So I think, Jay, to your point, even though this number is going to specify a megawatt of capacity value, it's actually going to be driven by an energy requirement. And if you could maybe give me an hour when I get through my presentation, hopefully I'll kind of explain the differences there, you know, when I do my presentation.
Okay, I just want to, it was a mistake we dealt with here. We retired a coal plant here, it's 180 megawatts. We had a time frame. We only looked at replacing that capacity, didn't look at the total energy. And we paid a bill with buying more oil to replace a portion of that. So there's, you know, those details matter.
Good, thanks, Jay. Yeah, we didn't just, the statement of need committee did not distinguish or have that detailed conversation either in Roswell or in one of our working group meetings. So we'll capture that as a feedback on this. Pay attention to both the capacity and the energy requirements. And I think, as Ben pointed out, he'll discuss some more about that in his presentation. Let's see, we've got a couple of more questions in the chat. Athena, you had a question about how does new technology get considered? Oh, it does SPS put out RFIs. So I assume that you're talking about the section on new resources in the statement of need. So how does new technology get considered, and does SPS put out RFIs as a screening tool or awareness tool on new technologies? Ben, do you want to take that?
Sure, and hopefully it's a little bit quieter on my end right now. So yeah, in terms of how we procure new generating resources, we expect to actually issue an RFP, so a request for proposals, sometime next year after the statement of need is identified. So probably not an RFI, more than likely an RFP.
But Athena, do you want to elaborate on your question? I think her point, Ben, is, well, let me not try to speak for her. Go ahead, Athena.
Yes, because the new technology is coming out, are you going to at least start looking at new technologies more in depth? Not necessarily for this particular RFP, this cycle, 3-year planning, but in a way to look out past beyond that?
Oh, okay, so sorry, Athena, when you're talking about kind of new technologies, you're talking more like emerging technology, some sort of long duration battery or something along those sort of lines, as opposed to kind of new projects. Gotcha.
Yes.
So yeah, what we might do, and we haven't talked about this yet, so this is certainly not, agreed upon, but I think we could look at issuing an RFI in conjunction with the RFP. So the RFP would kind of solicitate resources for that short time frame, the 5 to 7 years out. And then as we issue that RFP, we could also issue a RFI that would seek kind of some pricing technical characteristics of those emerging technologies that we expect to use in future IRPs and really solving that capacity need from 2030 to 2040.
I think it's also worth mentioning, Ben, that the RFP that we'll eventually issue will be an all source RFP. So we won't be constraining what type of resources are bid into that RFP.
And is that
thank you. So
is that constraint going to treat generation and storage differently? I mean, that's going to be kind of difficult if you don't look at them both together. So is it going to require an RFP with combined?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just kind of rephrase what Zoe just said and see if I answer your question. So when we issue the RFP, like I said, likely next year, it will be an all source RFP. So in other words, we will receive proposals from wind projects, from solar projects, from battery energy storage projects. All of those types of projects would all bid into the same RFP. The RFI component would be looking further out into the future, ones that probably aren't commercially available today, but so we can start gathering technical characteristics, potential future pricing in order to start solving that capacity need that's, you know, later in the planning period, the 2030 to 2040 timeframe.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ben and Athena, for asking that question. And I see a comment from Colette and Chantel. Sorry, I'm not sure who that is. Can you come off mute, Colette and Chantel, and add your, I think it was a supporting comment about life cycle analysis? Okay. And then Athena, you had another question about SPP, the SPP, and will they be expected to move to a loss of load criteria rather than a planning reserve margin criteria? I don't recall if that's something that we addressed in some of the previous discussions. And I don't know if somebody from the SPS team can comment on whether the SPP was thinking about moving to loss of load criteria in addition to or as replacement for planning reserve margin?
So they're one and the same. So SPP conducts a loss of load expectation study. The loss of load expectation then sets the planning reserve margin. So maybe where I think SPP are likely to go is at the moment, the loss of load expectation is a frequency driven study. How often would you expect to lose load? 0.1 day per year or 1 day every 10 years? I think what you may start seeing SPP move to is an energy adequacy requirement, which would then measure the size of that lost load, how many megawatt hours were lost during that event. But right now, as things stand, a loss of load expectation and a planning reserve margin study are one and the same.
Thanks, Ben.
Hi, this is Mark Bebo. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, Mark.
Hi, sorry about that. I was muted and I didn't know how to unmute. And those are my daughter's names. They're on the Zoom account, so I apologize for that.
No worries.
What was your question again?
Mark, the question was about life cycle. You want to add a comment about life cycle analysis? And I got the
Well,
impression-
yes, I feel that when we consider the new future, we're replacing one thing with another, and that is for materials, for example, is what we're looking at, and where we get those materials from, how we mine them, whether it's from the bottom of the ocean, which is what people are considering, which is a little disturbing, but it's also, there's a benefit to society. So we just need to understand that, for example. And this is where the national labs and looking at different materials potentially could help out.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Mark.
So if someone could tell me how to change my name on this, I will do that. So it represents me.
I bet Deb can give you some instruction through chat.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mark. And then I see David Millar had a comment about the energy and capacity conversation that we're having. I think, David, you indicate that energy is important, but not a requirement to fill all energy needs, since SPS is part of the integrated market through the SPP. Do you want to elaborate on your comment, David?
If there's any questions about it, but I mean, it's just basically we don't have to fill all of the energy from SPS resources, or there's opportunities to take cheap energy from the market, especially if other entities in the market are adding a lot of wind and solar. That it's not necessarily a requirement that you have to generate all the megawatt hours in your own portfolio. That's it.
Great.
So this is Mark Bebo. Could I ask a question regarding that? Does
Sure.
that then require transmission, more transmission potentially, and also the availability of that extra out there? So you take a little risk then.
Yeah, I mean, this probably a question that Ben can answer better about, just to make sure that they're covering their risk, and if congestion is part of that risk profile. But assuming that there's generally enough between the portfolio, and you also have capacity. That's why we have capacity resources on the system, right? So it can generate and cover your load, but doesn't have to, right? If it's more economically beneficial to buy from the market, then you should.
Yeah, if it's available, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's put that conversation on hold until the modeling result in conversation that we have. I think it's a good point that you've raised. Let's hold that until we get through the next conversation that might be informed by the analysis that SPS is currently doing. So yeah, thanks for bringing that to our attention. So let me bring us back again. Thanks to the SONIC, the Statement of Need Interim Committee, for putting together this document. Please submit, if you haven't done it by chat, please submit to me by email, mtatro@gridworks.org. By July 20th, any feedback that you have on this document, because we will be turning that around to all of you before the August 1st meeting. And we'll do a check on the level of consensus amongst the group at that point. So with that, I have a huge virtual applause for Jim Desjardins for presenting today and representing the interim committee, as well as the other members who have helped create this content. So thanks again, Jim, for being arm twisted and doing a fabulous job presenting the status of the document. So now we have the opportunity to move to the conversation about the modeling results. I'm going to turn the meeting over to my colleague, Jay Griffin, to facilitate this next session. So Jay, over to you.
Thanks, Margie. Thanks, everyone. We will, just as the slide says, we'll transition to Ben and team for a presentation on their base model run results. And I think the format we'd like to use for soliciting feedback and questions are, as you have them, please post them in the chat. When we get through the full presentation and then break, we'll run through those questions in order in the chat. But let's try and give Ben's team the opportunity to run through all the material in the time that's allotted. I know they've worked hard over the past few weeks, including through the 4th of July holiday. So thank them for keeping on track here. And without anything further, we'll turn it over to the SPS team.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can somebody just confirm they can see my screen?
Yes.
I can see it, Ben.
Yes, Ben, good.
Perfect. And I'm going to be presenting and running the slides, so I will not be able to see any questions as they come in. So Jay, if you don't mind emceeing if we have any questions, maybe clarifying questions through the presentation and then substantial questions after.
Okay.
Okay, and now.
So Ben, before you start, my first question for the group is our announcement that we will make this slide deck available after this meeting on the gridworks.org website. So you will have access to these after today's meeting.
Perfect. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start with probably the most important slide of today, which is a disclaimer, of course. So the modeling we're going to present today is essentially very, very rough draft demonstrated modeling. So as we mentioned in the last IRP meeting, we still have several critical inputs to update. The NREL cost data for renewables being one. That actually has been released. I did look at it last night very briefly. So we're going to update the cost assumptions for renewables. There's also some load forecasts we're going to need to update. So again, these results are very, very rough draft. What I really wanted to achieve today was just to go through the slides, kind of show people how production cost modeling works, and then give you some rough draft results just to start driving some conversation in future discussions.
And Ben, if you move to a different slide from the cover one, it's not showing up on Zoom.
Well, let me.
Now I see it. Yep. Now I see it. You just have to select the slide.
Okay, I'll run through this mode. Is it zoomed in enough so can you see it okay?
I can see it fine.
Okay. So I'll stick in this view and then let me know if I need to zoom in. The other thing I just wanted to quickly add, actually, before I go any further, there was a great point in the scope of needs presentation that Jim provided, which is this is subject to the RFP next year. So we can model, the cost of new resources based on generic costs, the NREL assumptions, our own cost estimates, but it's really going to be dependent upon those resources actually bidding into an RFP. So again, keep in mind, we've modeled everything at generic costs. If resources in an RFP come in lower than the generics, they may get selected ahead of our generic projects. Likewise, if they come in higher than the generics we model, they may not get selected. So just keep that in mind. It's an important difference there. So first of all, let's talk about Encompass fundamentals. This really applies to most production cost models, if not all of them. This isn't specific to Encompass. Encompass is just the model we use. So first of all, and Kara and I went briefly back and forth on this, but what's cost effective, what's economical? So let's start with answering that question. We're going to use the term most cost effective portfolio of resources a lot during this presentation. So what we talk about is not the cost of an individual resource. We're not talking about the cost of a 200 megawatt CT or a 400 megawatt wind farm. What we're talking about is the entire cost of the portfolio. So all of the resources added together. And it's over a period of time. So in this case, the IRP planning period is 20 years. And everything is converted back to a present value basis. We're going to go into this in more detail earlier. So just a reminder, total system costs on a present value basis over 20 years of the entire generating portfolio. The costs are broadly categorized into two different kind of buckets. We have fixed cost in the model, and we have variable, also known as production costs. When we're talking about fixed costs, we're talking about capital investments, we're talking about labor at the plants, maintenance of units. These costs generally do not change with the short-term output of a generator. Now, if you start seeing a generator operate more frequently, then you may see over time your fixed cost increase to account for that additional generation. But typically what we're talking about is with fixed costs is they stay the same, broadly speaking, year to year. Then when we move on to production costs, these are usually presented on a megawatt hour basis, and these are going to directly change with the output of a generator. So as the generation goes up, your production costs are going to go up with it, and as they come down, your production costs will come down. These are costs which are, fuels, chemicals, and then also, and I'm going to get into this into more detail in a couple of slides' time, but to David's point earlier, purchasing from other generation within the SPP marketplace. That's definitely a critical part of our modeling, and I'm going to address that in detail. So then when we look at annual total watt system costs, we're talking the fixed costs of existing and new generation, plus the production costs to serve load. So the megawatt hour generation to serve our load requirements. Subtract from that our production revenue. So likewise, as we can purchase from the Southwest Power Pool, we can also sell in to the Southwest Power Pool. So we could sell generation to other load responsible entities within the SPP. So that's revenue to the company. That's a subtraction from our cost. And then Encompass creates the most cost-effective portfolio of resources to meet SPS's energy and capacity needs. And this is kind of to Jay's point. We're not solving just a capacity. We're actually solving the portfolio that serves our energy needs at the lowest possible cost. And I now want to go to kind of Jay's issue with their co-plant. There's a couple of misconceptions that people have when we look at production cost modeling. So the first misconception is Encompass or whatever other model utilities are using should solve to the planning reserve margin. In other words, we should build enough resources to meet our currently 15% PRM. That is not how Encompass solves, and that's not how Encompass should solve. So what we're actually doing is we are solving to the lowest possible cost for our total system. Now that may mean we add wind generation on, even when we have a 15% PRM. So we could continue to add wind on the system, increasing our PRM from 15 to 20 to 25% if that's producing fuel savings for our customers. So just want to be clear, we do not solve our models to meet the PRM requirement. We solve our models to serve our load, our customer load at the lowest possible cost. And then misconception number two is that generation needs to be replaced when it's retired. So I talk about this all the time, and it's kind of my mistake to phrase it this way. We will say things like, when Toke retires, how are we going to replace that generation? When the 180 megawatt coal plant retires in Hawaii, how are we going to replace that generation? Encompass really doesn't care about replacing generation per se. What Encompass is looking at is solving our energy needs at the lowest possible cost. Now, when you retire a generator, you're going to need more energy, and you're also going to need capacity. So retiring generation certainly increases the need for new resources, but you're not really looking at replacing generation like in kind. Now, this is an important distinction because new generation may be acquired years in advance of a retiring generator. In other words, let's say we have a generator that retires in 2030. We could bring a new facility online in 2026 that would eventually replace that generator, but may provide greater economic savings today. So again, just to recap, we're not looking at replacing generation on a one-to-one basis. And then when we look at the most cost-effective portfolio of resources, I mentioned earlier, we're looking at total system costs on a present value basis over an extended period of time, in this case, 20 years. So what Encompass is going to do, and again, what most production cost models are going to do, is they're going to calculate the cost of the system on an annual nominal basis. So what you see here is in 2023, our generation portfolio is just shy of $1 billion. Now that's $1 billion that includes fixed cost, capital investment, and then also any fuel costs, market energy purchases, less market energy sales. We're going to do that for every single year, going out 20 years. I'm only showing 4 years here, just to kind of save some space on the slide, but essentially this will go out 20 years. And then what we do is we present value this back. So we discount it back to a single number, which is a 20-year number. So this would be our present value of our total system costs between 2023 and 2042 in this example. And you'll see our total system costs are around $12.5 billion. So this is kind of always makes me laugh, because this is when you start talking about when is $1 million and not a lot of money. Now, people want to concentrate on the numbers, but you've got to keep an eye on the magnitude of these numbers. So when you're talking about $12.5 billion, $12.5 billion with an extra 1 million really is in the modeling noise. So that's not a huge difference. So that's one thing I'll just recommend as we start going through costs, is we keep in mind in this instance, when you're looking at 20 years, $1 million isn't necessarily a big number. And then just before I go any further, this is kind of just a flashback to a previous slide that we produced in prior meetings that shows our capacity need kind of in the 29 time frame going through to 2042, 28 to 42. So the solid line here is our expected load. Now, this is under the planning forecast. This does not include some of the significant load growth that we're going to model as a sensitivity analysis. The dotted line adds on the current 15% PRM. And notice I say current, because again, we're going to do a sensitivity with a higher PRM. And then you see what our capacity need is in these out years. Now, keep in mind, again, as I mentioned earlier, Encompass is not necessarily solving for the capacity need. Encompass absolutely has to fulfill this capacity need. So Encompass will make sure we have enough resources to meet this capacity need. But Encompass can, one, overbuild resources if it's more economical to do so. And Encompass can also build resources earlier if it's more economical to do so. So for example, we show a capacity need in 2029. Encompass may actually overbuild resources in 2028 because that's the most economical on a PVRR basis or on a net present value basis. So Jay, let me just quickly pause there. I know we're saving questions till the end, but were there any kind of clarifying questions, acronyms, or anything like that I need to address?
We have one so far. One was, I don't know if those, but we'll take it since you paused. Jeff Pollock asked if the results also quantify the impact on actual rates. So I think he's looking for a retail rate projection, based on that, annual net present, or the annual revenue requirements. I don't know if that's the full revenue requirement that you talked about modeling on the past slide. Is that, I think, translation from that slide to retail rates?
Yeah, so to some extent, yes, but this model is not really designed to calculate impact to customer rates in their entirety. So what you could calculate from these models is you can look at the generation costs from year to year. But what it doesn't take into account is transmission, distribution, and other costs that are embedded into rates. So I think this could help provide insight, Jeff, but it wouldn't give you the final answer if you took this and divided it by kind of sales.
How about in the IRP filing itself?
We haven't historically done that. Again, the model can't do that. Itself, it doesn't calculate rates. So, I mean, that would be a tricky one to address. We could certainly provide some context on the generation side. And this does include transmission required to build out this generation, but it wouldn't be specific enough within the IRP to say this type of class of customer is going to see a 2% rate increase between 24 and 25. We don't have enough information in these generation planner models to do that.
Yeah, if I could interject, this is Jeff, Ben. I think it's kind of important that the IRP at least show, if you're going to running different scenarios, to show what those differences and how those differences impact rates, even if it's just from a generation perspective, but it provides some kind of relative, framework to show how rates may go under one scenario, they may increase differently under a second scenario or a third scenario, but at least it's what we understand. It's not going to, give you the actual rates they're going to pay because of all the other elements that aren't part of the IRP. I think it's important to present a picture that shows what those factors or what those potential impacts on rates look like under various scenarios. So that's obviously one of the things we want to look at.
Yeah, so Jeff, sorry, I misunderstood the question. So to that extent, I think the answer is yes. And I think when I get down to the final slide, yeah, we've got some information that I can present to you, and we'll see if that's what you're looking for.
Ben, that was it so far. Thanks.
Okay. So let's just move on to the modeling. I don't like to use the word completed because, again, these are very draft, very preliminary results. But essentially, we presented this scenario tree, this hierarchy tree, in the last meeting. And essentially what it's going to show is kind of our first two scenarios. So we mentioned previously in meetings that, you know, obviously we are a multi-jurisdiction state. So we have retail load in Texas and New Mexico, and then also some wholesale load. Excuse me. So when we look at SOBR in our model, what we're trying to do is work out, essentially, we're trying to define the impact to rates or the impact to generation costs that one state's or one jurisdiction's policies are going to have on the other. So our first kind of analysis we do is a multi-jurisdictional baseline. And in this baseline, what we're going to model is all resource types that are available today or commercially available today. And we're going to set aside briefly the New Mexico RPS goes. Now, to be clear, and I presented this in the last meeting, this will not form part of the IRP. This will not be a recommended scenario in the IRP. This is just purely to establish a baseline. And then the second scenario we've looked at is kind of our first level one, which would be, I'm going to just move this box so hopefully everyone can follow, the existing technologies. So presenting to this meeting, we're going to show you the New Mexico IRP base case under the existing resource adequacy requirements, the 15% PRM, with existing commercially available renewable technologies only. So that would include solar, wind, 4, 6, 8-hour batteries, and then also hybrid projects. So that would be, for example, a solar plus battery project in one. There is no new gas generation within this scenario. There is new gas generation on this level 0 multi-jurisdictional baseline. So that's going to be the difference that we're presenting today, is essentially a case with gas and then a case without gas. And then we want to kind of explain why some of the technical characteristics of firm and dispatchable generation are desirable. And that's really driving the need for these other scenarios. And again, hopefully this red box is moving to the potential for long duration storage. And then also the potential for hydrogen conversion or potentially carbon capture. I'm going to get into that in more detail later. So these are the only two scenarios we're presenting today. Again, future sensitivities or future scenarios, we're going to look at an increased resource adequacy requirement, so an 18% summer PRM, 20% winter PRM. And then also underneath each of those scenarios, as I just explained, long duration battery in addition to the renewable resources. And then currently what would be considered gas generation with the potential for carbon capture or hydrogen conversion. So as Jay mentioned earlier, we did work through the July 4th weekend. So some of these slides aren't necessarily the prettiest, but they're effective. So this is one of those examples. As we look at the scenario here, which is the existing commercially viable technology. So this is the level 0 run. So I'm skipping around the multi-jurisdictional baseline. When we start building Encompass, we have our existing portfolio of resources. So this is all of our existing SPS owned generation, plus all of our long-term purchase power agreements, and then any other qualifying facilities, any other small type of resources. We then give Encompass the option, as I mentioned earlier, to select wind, solar, 4, 6, and 8-hour batteries. There's a separate box around here because Encompass could also pick a hybrid project, which is solar and batteries. And then also gas combustion turbine generators, they're F-class, 233 megawatt summer, winter rating, excuse me. And then F-class 2-on-1 combined cycle generations with a summer rating of 771 megawatts. Encompass will pick the lowest cost mix of these resources in order to fulfill our energy requirements and our capacity requirements. So now as we go down and we look at the resources that were selected, what you're going to see is in every case in the summer, we actually have a generation portfolio that far exceeds the PRM of 15% in every single year in 29 and beyond. In other words, when you start looking at these resources, we're no longer just trying to hit this 15% kind of goal or target that maybe people did in the past when everything was coal and gas. Now you're building resources based on energy economics rather than a capacity need. I'm not going to get into the actual megawatt values of these numbers right now because I've got another slide in a minute, which I think is a little bit easier to see. But again, just keep in mind, far exceeding the 15% PRM. Now, when we talk about our level 1, this would be kind of our base case in the New Mexico IRP. So this is the same as previously, but in this case, we're only allowing existing resources plus wind, solar, 4, 6, and 8-hour lithium-ion battery energy storage projects with the addition of hybrid projects, which was solar and batteries. Again, Encompass is going to do exactly the same optimization. It's going to pick the lowest cost of these resources, the lowest cost portfolio, in order to fulfill our energy and capacity needs. And again, you can see a similar slide. Now, this side, you're going to see much more generation coming online. Again, we're going to get into the individual numbers in a moment. But you can start seeing we're adding a lot of generation because that's the most economical solution when you have these resources to select from. So now let's start talking numbers. Now, again, I'm just going to say this every single slide. I'm going to, probably wear everyone out, but these are draft results, excuse me. These will change. They're going to change when we update the end-road data. They're going to change when we update load. And they're also going to be subject to the RFP. So these resources need to actually turn up in the RFP. So on the left-hand side is kind of that level 0 baseline, the multi-jurisdictional baseline. And what you'll see here is approximately, let's start with the blue, 4,820 megawatts of new wind generation over the next 14 or 15 years. We started in 2028, which is kind of the earliest we think we're going to get new resources online, and we can certainly talk about that. So nearly 5,000 megawatts of wind coming online between now and 2042. 6,000 megawatts of solar generation. 2,700 megawatts of battery energy storage. All of this was 4-hour batteries. The model picked all 4 hours and not 6 hours, not 8 hours. And then 4,000 megawatts of currently gas generation, but again, with the understanding this could potentially be converted to hydrogen or carbon capture at a later date. So this is the level 0 baseline. Now, keep in mind, these numbers are huge. We're going to be let me go back to the prior slide. We're forecasting peak demand in the region of 5,500 with a 15% PRM. We're looking at a 6,000 megawatt accredited capacity need. What we see here is the addition of many, many more megawatts. Now, this is nameplate. So when you start looking at wind, you're talking 20% accreditation, you're talking 5,000 megawatts of nameplate, about 1,000 megawatts of accredited capacity. Now let's compare scenario or level 0 to level 1. So in this case, we omit the ability to add gas generation. So this Encompass can only select commercially available resources today, which is again, solar, wind, and batteries. So what we see here is the wind's about the same, and I'm going to explain why in a moment. So for 4,800, 5,100, 5,200, for this sort of analysis, that's kind of noise. We're very, very close. Naturally, the solar generation is going to be higher. So you're going to need the capacity, you're going to need the energy, on-peak energy from the solar generation if you don't have gas that's available. And then obviously the big difference here is the amount of energy storage that you're going to add. In order to serve load in all hours of the day, obviously when the sun's not shining, when the wind's not blowing, you're going to need a lot of batteries, a complete overbuild of batteries in order to reliably serve customers. Now note, you're adding 10,000 megawatts of batteries to a system that's going to peak somewhat 6,000 or needing 6,000 megawatts. That's because it's limited duration of 4 hours. As you start having longer duration battery energy storage, in theory, you're going to need less nameplate capacity. So that is one of the reasons this scenario is important. With storage in the future, it becomes economical and commercially viable. As you start looking at these plans, you can hopefully cut down the amount of batteries that you need to add. So I mentioned earlier the wind is about the same in each case, and I think that's a really interesting concept. So really what we're looking at here, wind is a fairly poor, relatively speaking, poor capacity resource. Wind is a fantastic energy resource. In other words, when the wind is blowing and the wind generation is at its highest, it's typically not necessarily correlated with our peak hours, our peak demand hours. So what you usually see is wind generation doesn't change as much when you start doing sensitivity analysis. It's going to select this wind if it provides economical energy. So again, we're picking about 5,000 megawatts of wind because that's really the saturation point on the system. If you take into account the existing wind, this is all new. You take into account the 2,400 megawatts of existing wind we've got. This is really saying, okay, we're going to sell, we're going to, one, use wind whenever it's available to serve our load. Two, we're going to sell excess wind into the SPP market. And three, you're going to use surplus wind to charge these batteries. So typically what you see, wind stays pretty constant. Solar obviously increases as you lose gas generation. So again, if the wind's not generating during peak hours, what is? If you don't have gas available, you don't have coal available, you're going to see obviously an increase in solar. Solar, not quite as good of energy resources, wind, has a lower capacity factor on an annual basis, but its generation is much better correlated with peak demand. So solar's generation profile gives it more capacity. So that's where you start seeing solar and wind. And then obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the storage is needed to fill in the gaps when you don't have wind and you don't have solar. So as we move on to reserve margin, we looked earlier on these slides and I said, we're going to build, essentially you're going to overbuild on resources. I'm going to start with the right-hand chart. So you see this black line here is our level 0 or multi-jurisdictional base case. And even in this case where you allow new gas, you're still overbuilding on a plan and reserve margin because it's adding economical energy. In other words, the PRM really, it's certainly something we need to plan for, but it's no longer the defining factor. Economic energy is what's driving new resources and not necessarily PRM. And then when you exclude gas, naturally, you're going to need more batteries, you're going to need more solar. So again, you're planning to an even higher PRM. What's interesting is we look on the left is our winter reserve margin. So somebody asked me either at a previous meeting or a rate case recently, will SPS become a winter peaking utility? And the answer right now is no. But what we're really looking at is our peak net of renewable production. So if we go back a slide and you start looking at all of this additional solar generation, that solar generation is a great capacity resource in the summer. It is not a good capacity resource in the winter. So what you start seeing is this solar is really being added for economic energy, driving the plan and reserve margin up. But when you start looking at the winter, we're just holding on to the 15% and we start to tick up towards the end. So this is just proving it's pretty critical as we go forward and as we transition away from coal and gas, that we start planning for at least every single month of the year, but more importantly, every single hour of the year. And then I'm going to go on to CO2 emissions under each portfolio. So again, black line is our sensitivity case with gas. The red line is our sensitivity case without new gas. And what we're measuring here is our carbon reduction from SPS's 2005 levels. So in SPS in 2005, we produced around 25 million tons of CO2. Right now, as we stand today, we've released our sustainability report in the last week or two. We have cut carbon emissions by approximately 53% since 2005. What you're going to see after 2028 through 2029, when the coal plant is due to retire, is a significant reduction in carbon emissions. And then as you project out into the future, what you see is us trending down to the eventual 2045 goal of being carbon free in New Mexico. One thing that's worth noting, even though in this case you're adding significant amount of new gas, you're adding 4,000 megawatts, we're keeping in mind that's peaking gas generation. So this is not adding base load gas, this is adding essentially fast start, quick ramping combustion turbine generators that are not necessarily going to operate frequently. They're really going to follow that wind and solar generation to make sure we have enough generation and load. And that's why you don't see this huge discrepancy between these two numbers. And then I'm going to go here and we're going to talk about New Mexico's RPS goals. So again, if we look on the left chart, we see our renewable production as a percentage of energy. Right now, and it's actually, this is shown in gigawatt hours, or shown down here. Right now, we're around 40-ish%. I'm not sure why 24 is a little bit low. I'd have to investigate that. We've been at around 40% for the last 2 or 3 years. What we're going to see in both cases, regardless of whether we have new gas or not, when the Toke units retire, there's going to be a significant build out of new renewable generation. So we actually see ourselves by 2030 far exceeding the, I think it's the 50% requirement at that time. So we plan to be somewhat closer to the 2040, 80% requirement, almost a decade earlier. Now, keep in mind a couple of things that are very important. One is we have not constrained the model at all. The model is not selecting these resources to meet the RPS goal. The model is selecting these resources because they are most economical to do so. Now, one thing I will caveat that though is, as I've mentioned a couple of times, that's on the assumption these resources show up at the cost we modeled. So if we're modeling wind at, let's just say for argument's sake, $25 a megawatt hour, we issue an RFP next year and all we get is wind at $50 a megawatt hour, you may see less winds come onto the system, which will impact these percentages. Likewise, if we model wind at $25 an hour and it comes into an RFP at $20 an hour, you may see some of these numbers increase. So this is all subject to the generation turning up. And then the last slide that I have is, I think is mainly to Jeff's point earlier, is what's the cost impact? So all we've done here is quantify the PBRR or the NPV, the 20-year NPV for each of the scenarios. So in the scenario where we allow new gas, and it is new gas, there's no cost embedded in here for hydrogen conversion or carbon capture at this stage. Our system cost is around $13 billion on a PBRR basis. If we exclude the ability to add gas and we just allow solar, wind, 4, 6, and 8 hour batteries, our system costs increase to about $13.9 billion. So the incremental cost of a portfolio that does not include new gas is about $935 million on a PBRR basis. Now, keep in mind that scenario, we would model, or let me go back to this slide here. We're looking at the multi-jurisdictional baseline. When we come to model this for New Mexico's IRP, we will end up modeling this scenario here, which will include embedded costs for either relying upon hydrogen blending and then hydrogen conversion or carbon capture. So this delta, as we produce more modeling, will likely decrease. So I'm not sure, Jay, that's all I had to present today. I don't know if I'm ahead of schedule, behind schedule. Happy to answer questions.
First off, thanks, Ben. Thanks for that, and thanks for your team's work over the holiday. I got to look at our schedule minder, check with her. I'm pretty sure we're ahead of schedule as we had an hour for this so far.
Yeah, Jay, right. We're going to go to 3:15 for a break and then do Q&A after that. We can certainly start with Q&A now. That would be fine. Unless you want to take a break now. Your choice, Jay.
Ben, how are you doing? Maybe my suggestion, we take a little shorter break right now, and then we run through the full Q&A rather than trying to break it up. So 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Margie, what do you think?
Let's do 15. Let's come back at 3 o'clock, and then we'll just go go through questions starting then at 3 o'clock.
And my only other ask is people, please keep putting your questions in the chat. We've had a bunch come in. I've been taking notes, so yeah, we'll run through that as soon as we start up again.
Great. It's 2:46, so we join at 3 o'clock.
Thank you. Ben, are you able to see the chat now? With questions, so
I can
that's
either
good
share.
news.
Yeah, I can either share my screen or see the chat. I assume some of the questions may want to be going to slides.
First off, let's make sure we got everyone back. I think first up here was a question from Cynthia Mitchell with the PRC.
Ben, do you want me to share the slides so that you can look at the chat?
Sure, yeah, if you don't mind.
Jay, do you want me to run through my questions?
So Cynthia, let's take them in order. Let's start your first question and then we'll come back to you. I think your first question was for the multi-jurisdictional case, asking that similar to the rate case TOLC for the TOLC.
Yeah, and I think Ben actually hit on that it is. So I was just clarifying that.
Not exactly the same, Cynthia. There's some updated inputs that we have updated in the model, but same principle.
So it's similar to though.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Right. And so if I was to characterize that, I would say that is SPS's preferred plan. It was your portfolio build out in the rate case.
I'm not sure I'd characterize it as our preferred plan. I think that's just what the model would naturally select if you didn't constrain it any further.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ben.
Okay, next we have Michael Kenny. Do you want me to restate your question? Is Michael on here?
Yeah, I'm available. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, my question was just about how demand response is treated, and in particular how SPP allows it to count towards resource adequacy or not.
Yeah, so Michael, currently SPP treats demand response as a load reduction. So under current rules, demand response would reduce load. There's definitely discussion. In fact, there's actually a small group that meets semi-frequently that is looking at demand response essentially being treated the same as a generating resource. So it would be subject to effective load carrying capability studies. That has not yet been introduced. So currently it's a load reduction.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Cynthia, next question on the PPA extensions.
Right. Then you said it includes the retirements of the PPA. So a sensitivity might include extension of all or some of the PPAs. And we've had this discussion a little bit before.
Yeah, so right now we do not assume a extension of a PPA per se. So if we wanted to assume that PPA's extensions were handled separately from kind of the normal IRP, RFP process, that would be a sensitivity.
Okay, but we could consider that possibly. Okay, great, thank you.
So Cynthia, one thing I would like to add there, though, I think there's some language in the RPS rules that require renewables that are counted towards the RPS to be part of the competitive solicitation. So we would have to navigate that language and make sure that was compliant with the RPS.
Right, got it. But this was a conversation actually I was having with Ed Realkoff early this morning on SPS and P&M, that just because there's a end of term on a PPA, that we should, at least in some of the modeling, being considering extensions, even though those PPAs go back through the RFP process. So this is really a point from Ed as much as myself.
Can I maybe ask a clarifying, Ben? How does the model treat basically end of life of projects? Is it treated as a rebid under new term? Basically let me just stop there. How is it treating the end of life?
Specifically for renewables, Jay, or for all generation?
Sure. I guess, sorry, I mean, I guess if they differ, that'd be good to know as well.
Okay. So for the model, we have, let's start with SPS owned generation, so not PPAs. So we have retirement dates for each of our generating units. So let's just say generator A retires at the end of 2030. From the model's perspective, all of the depreciation of those assets will run through 2030. And then at the end of 2030, that unit essentially ceases to exist. So it's no longer in the model for 2031 and beyond. When we come to do replacement resources, the model just then has the option of picking the portfolio of new resources. We do allow generation that will be sited at existing generating locations not to receive any transmission network upgrades. So let me rephrase that. As we retire existing generation, we assume we can add some new generation without transmission network upgrades. So that's maybe one slight difference there. From a PPA perspective, we just assume those PPAs expire at the end of their contract date. So if the PPA expires at the end of 2025, again, in 26 and beyond, that PPA would cease to exist in the model.
And I just wanted to know, and Ben, you and I've had this discussion about particularly the Harrington Wind project that's being repowered with larger blades and such. So that's not being included as an ongoing unit. It's out of the mix right now, and that's about, it's over 200 megawatts, I believe.
So I saw that email come through, but I'm not sure we ever had the conversation. So just a couple of clarifying points there. So Harrington's not a wind project. I think you're referring to Hale.
Hale, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So those numbers, I think that was kind of maybe just a misconception there. So Hale's 478 megawatts. It's not being repowered right now. Hale was commercially operational in 2019. So that is operating at or near its maximum capability. In fact, it was upgraded to 494 megawatts. I think what you were looking at on one of those slides was the accredited capacity of SPS's entire wind portfolio, which was around about 250 megawatts.
Right. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks for straightening me out on that. I've got it. Good, thank you.
And just to close the loop on the repowering project, but you said they're per New Mexico current RPS law, they're supposed to go through a bidding process, but presumably a repowered plant would be one of the more competitive ones in that solicitation. So that's how SPS deals with that end of life, that you model it, new resources are needed, but they're available among the pool of candidates when the term's up.
Yeah, so Jay, to that point, when we issued our RFP in November of 2022, we absolutely got existing PPAs bid into that RFP as repower projects. So our expectation going into 2024, when we issue the all source RFP, would also allow repowering of the existing PPAs or existing facilities.
Okay, so just you model it this way to deal with the modeling standpoint, but the practice itself, leaves the door open. And in fact, if they can be the most competitive, they're likely to be selected. That's
absolutely.
Okay. Does that help, Cynthia?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now you had a few questions here after the PPA one. So can you?
Right. This is also more from Ed Realkoff, the Utility Division Director, than myself, raised in discussion today. The selection of new gas generation through Encompass as the lower cost resource, which may then actually exceed your load needs, is interesting. But I assume, or Ed assumes, or has a question about how you're considering its limited life if you're complying with the ETA. For instance, new gas added in 2030 needs to be off the system by 2040 and or converted to hydrogen. So We don't have, PRC staff doesn't have a recommendation on this yet. We just started talking about it today, that maybe you do need to adjust the depreciation schedule. Maybe new gas that comes on at 2030 is only, it has to be fully depreciated in, you know, the 10 years, or picked up as utility cost after the 10 years. And then I put in some questions. Also, this is Ed's concern about the inclusion of all costs, the hydrogen conversion and carbon capture. And I appreciate, Ben, you making that clarification that at level 0, hydrogen costs are not included, but they would be included in level 3. And so just as we go forward with the representation of what's most cost effective selected by Encompass, it's going to be important to us that we have full cost representation and reasonable depreciation of gas resources.
Yeah, so maybe if I can just respond to that. And Sonia, you're showing the slides. Do you mind going to the modeling hierarchy slide that shows the level 0, 1, 2, and 3? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So to your point, again, just to reiterate simply what you just said, the level 0 assumes the gas with no hydrogen conversion, no carbon capture, with I think it's a 40-year depreciation life.
Oh, okay.
As we start modeling the level 3 assumptions, so the hydrogen conversion, we really got two options. We could either model gas without any hydrogen conversion, without any carbon capture, and just merely assumes that it has to be depreciated and retired before, and maybe just like slightly different date, the end of 2044, which is when the 100% carbon-free goes kicks in 2045. So that's one way we can model it. What we're proposing to do though in level 3 isn't to model a reduced depreciation schedule. It is to assume that the CTs will be converted to carbon-free by the end of 2044. So then you wouldn't need to shorten the depreciation life because you would essentially be carbon-free by the ETH requirement.
Okay. Okay, I'll take that back to Ed and we'll have more discussion on that and get back to you as soon as possible if there's more clarifications or a request to do anything differently. But and then one question I had related to your new gas in the level 0 is, do you have a rough estimate of what's the capacity factor on those units as a whole? You did mention that they're, CTs that have very low runtime and such.
Yeah, usually with those peaking units, we see them on the highest end or near the high end is like 20%, 20, but typically they trend down over time and they end up somewhere in like the 3 to 5% sort of range as you're looking at the out years of the model. And then it's maybe just to kind of explain what that means to people on the phone who maybe aren't so familiar. When we talk about like a 5% capacity factor, we're talking it running essentially equivalent to full load 435-ish hours a year. So 8,760 hours a year times the 5% is where you get the 430, if my maths is right.
And I always want to just think in my mind, I jump to the conclusion that that's summer peak, but not necessarily, particularly with your solar. Could be, it could be, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's a fantastic point because, when we look at how utility planning used to work, it was basically baseload generation, your coal units, your intermediate generation, your CCs, and then your peaking units just ran in the high demand hours. Now what we see is pretty fascinating is that fast start generation, that quick ramping generation isn't really serving the peak. You've got so much solar generation online, you're serving the peak with the solar. So what you're really doing is you're just following renewables. So that generation could be at 6 a.m. on December Tuesday morning now, if that's when the wind profiles is dropping.
Right, right. And with P&M, we're seeing it as a net peak that happens in the later afternoon, early evening.
Yeah. So just as the solar's dying down and before that
Right.
wind's picking up, you're kind of seeing that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. And it really, really wonderful presentation, very informative and educational. Thank you.
Thank you.
James Hall, you're up next.
Yeah, Ben, you probably mentioned this and I've forgotten it, but I'm just thinking about the subsidies for whatever technology, right? Whether it's, solar or hydrogen or whatever. But does the model take into account, I guess you're getting your data on costs for deployment from the MREL sort of base data set. Does that set include subsidies? And then how does it handle existing subsidies that are going to be going away in 2032 or that don't have sort of certainty over the time horizon for the modeling study? I'm just trying to figure out the uncertainty associated with the subsidy assumptions in the modeling.
Yeah. Okay. So we're mainly talking here, James, tax credits for renewables and potentially some other kind of carbon capture technologies.
Yes.
The IRA.
IRA primarily, yeah.
So when we model, let's start with renewable resources and let's start with new renewable resources. We incorporate the impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act. So when we model wind generation, we model them with a PTC. Solar generation, we think is going to be more economical with a PTC rather than an ITC. It qualifies for both. And then when we model battery energy storage, we model batteries with an ITC and investment tax credit. So that is embedded in the assumptions for new generation.
And it's in, and
when we look,
oh, sorry, Ben, Karen.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, when we look at existing resources, and there's kind of two ways this happens, and it depends on the type of resource or the ownership structure of the resource. When we look at company-owned projects, so Sagamore Wind Farm, Hale Wind Farm, for example, we enter in the model the revenue requirements of those projects because they're essentially capital investments. And we include the PTC as it's amortized over the first 10 years where it qualifies. When we look at renewable PPAs, that are existing PPAs that qualify for a production tax credit, those costs are usually levelized over the life of the project. So we don't typically in our contracts see a price for the first 10 years that steps up for the latter 10 years. It's usually just a levelized cost over the duration of the project.
No, that makes sense. That's good. Yeah, that answers my question.
Okay, thanks, James. Thanks, Ben. David Millar. You still online?
Yes, sir.
Hey.
So yeah, I was just commenting on the. I think it's just really important to emphasize the level 0 versus level 1 that the greenhouse gas emissions were almost identical. While at the same time, the costs for the no new gas were higher. So, I'm not asking to do this now, but I would like to see if you just take the delta in the dollars divided by the emission savings, say what's that dollar per metric ton cost. I think that's useful information, especially if it's substantially above social cost of carbon. Then you might think that's not the most cost-effective way to reduce emissions.
Yeah, David, we can provide that data. That's one calculation I'm not going to try and do in my head right now. Those numbers are too big and complicated for me, but we can certainly provide it.
So yeah, David, you're basically like some form of output that looks at implied, it's the cost of carbon reduction.
That's the margin, right? The marginal cost for the emissions reduction you get, right?
Okay, and Ben, clarify that can be calculated. Okay. Athena has a question on storage. I think maybe Athena, I'll let you ask, but I think Ben,
yeah, because I don't think I asked it very well.
Maybe Ben, if you want to start with how storage is modeled here, and maybe that, I think it answers your question, Athena.
Sure. I see that you have 2, 4, 6, 8-hour storage and then long duration storage. The Department of Energy just recently had webinars on storage, including long duration storage. They've actually got it in more robust variations. They have the short duration up to 10 hours. They have interday. Sorry, I said intra. It's interday. Long duration storage, which is 10 to 36 hours, multi-day, a week up to 160 hours, and then seasonal shifting. So are you going to be including those for your future evaluations? And I
Yeah,
think
so
really.
Sorry, I spoke over you at the end there. So I'm not sure I heard the whole question, but let me go ahead and give you an answer. And Athena, if I miss anything, you obviously just jump in. So right now on this slide, what we're intending to model are kind of the current commercially available lithium-ion technologies, the 4, 6, 8 hours. That's if we issued an RFP today. That's what's likely to be, reasonably economic. When we look at kind of that future, when we go out to that kind of 2030 and beyond timeframe, we know we're going to need longer duration storage. So that's where we have this scenario in which we look at long duration storage. This would be 100-hour duration. If people want to provide additional comment or provide different characteristics and cost assumptions for, say, a 48-hour battery or a 72-hour battery, we absolutely could model that. Right now, we feel like kind of really just having 15 different types of batteries probably won't make a difference. The model is going to continue to pick the shorter duration storage until that long duration becomes economical. So I think, to your point earlier, that's definitely something we could look at, like in an RFI type arrangement, but it'd probably be further out than 7 years before it's commercially viable. Now, that's not to say, Athena, that we're not looking at. Xcel Energy actually has, not in Texas, but in our other jurisdictions, has 2 pilot programs right now for these very long duration storage projects. So we're certainly looking at it.
Okay. Yeah, I just kind of see a gap, and because you're saying of 100-hour long duration, and you're kind of going from 8 to 100 hours, and there's lots in between. And that kind of.
Yeah, we absolutely could model something in between. Like I said, just typically what we found is it's not going to select it because it's not economical. So just adding more and more inputs just slows the model down. It gets to a standstill. But if we want to do maybe something in between, we absolutely can. We just might need some help with some technical and cost characteristics.
Okay, could probably fix that.
And can I help maybe connect a couple of things here? When you show your results, the level 1 with the big add of storage, I mean, I think it showed up in both, but really those are, right, it's tied to the high reserve margin in the summer. Like basically those systems are charging with the solar during the daytime and discharging during the peak. That's kind of the general use case for the first set of results you have so far with the big addition of solar or big addition of batteries.
Yeah, I might disagree a little bit there. So first of all, let me talk about how we model batteries. Okay. I think I've seen a comment about round trip efficiency or efficiency of battery charging. So battery actually acts as a load within an Encompass model. So when we start looking at lithium-ion batteries that are available today, we're talking about like an 85% efficiency rating. So in order to get 100 megawatt hours out of a battery, you need to charge it with about 118 megawatts of generation. So there's an efficiency lost as you store that energy and convert it back. So when we look at how does the model treat battery, one, it treats it as a load, and it's going to charge it when it sees it's economical to charge, and then it's going to act as energy arbitrage, so discharge it when it's economical to do so. Now, historically, Jay, to your point, it would make sense to charge it at night when wind generation's high, load's low, and you have low NMPs, and then discharge it during the day in which you have peak demand, high, hours of high demand. But what we're really seeing now is as you add more solar generation, you're really covering that peak with the solar. In fact, you're probably selling some of that energy into the market. So those batteries are really, I think to Cynthia's point earlier, they're really bridging that gap between high solar penetration or high solar generation and then the wind picking up in the evening. So they're really kind of the net peak hours and not necessarily the gross peak hours.
Okay. That helps. And then, well, we've got a whole bunch of questions here, so we'll make sure we continue on. Let's see. Sorry, I've got to go back to, okay. James Hall, you had another question on your.
Yeah, Ben, last question from me. I just, maybe it's just my own anxiety. You know, if I look at the load and I see this sort of generic load forecast increase, and I just wonder in August when we have, you know, you talk about it in more detail and the results, if, you know, I know this commercial sensitivity around, you know, load and so forth, but at least break it out by, I don't know, industry and residential and a couple of other categories, so that if one is decreasing legitimately and that's offsetting the demand growth in the other, that's illustrated, as opposed to sort of assuming that just because we have a lot of load growth in the oil and gas sector that's not reflected perhaps in some of the numbers now. There's good reason for that. You know what I mean? Is there a way of doing that, just to sort of articulate that visually?
So James, I'm not sure if I'm going to answer your question, so jump in if I don't. But when we produce the IRP, we can certainly show the embedded assumptions for our load forecast. So what we're expecting in terms of different categories of customers, C&I, large C&I, small C&I, residential. We can show how that load profile or that load forecast is changing by class each year. But in terms of the actual Encompass model itself, this is open just to a complete system load. So it's hard to go and say 200 megawatts of this solar is for a C&I customer and 50 megawatts of this battery is for a residential customer. We can't do that.
Okay, well, I guess the granularity will be there in the IRP. The only issue is it might be a bit late by then, right? But okay, no, that's good. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, James. I think a few of these we have either covered or we're planning to cover coming up. So one was on, again, another question about the load forecast. I think Ben's covered this. Is that correct, Cynthia?
We'll talk about that when we get to our DER sensitivity.
Okay, and then we have a whole part of the agenda on some of the sensitivity, on some of the modeling requests, so we'll take that up there.
Great.
Mark, you asked for a question, how modeling accounts for the storage efficiencies. Did Ben's explanation provide enough for you to?
This is Mark. Yes, thank you. That did help. Just a follow-on quick question. Of course, energy storage efficiencies are not constant over time. Do you account for that drop in efficiency with the storage?
Yes. So we do that with both solar and storage. We usually see degradation of solar as well. With batteries, what we do when we issue an RFP is we ask them to provide annual profiles or annual degradation expectations. So what you usually see with batteries is you see their capacity drop off over time. But then what you usually see the contractors do, or the battery owners, is they go in and augment those batteries. So they go in and install new cells. So what you actually see is it's decreasing. Then you see a capital investment of that battery and it comes back to kind of its nameplate and then it decreases again. So we absolutely count that degradation and also the augmentation into account when we model battery energy storage. Solar, you don't typically see the augmentation. Solar, you usually just see kind of like a 0.5% decline in capacity factor per year.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
And then I'll maybe just add one thing, Jay, because we talked about round trip efficiency for lithium ion being 85, 88%. That's much, much lower when you start looking at other chemistry and other battery types. So that's one of the reasons, Athena, maybe to kind of your line of questioning, is when you start looking at long duration storage, the efficiency of long duration storage right now, as it stands today, which is pilot programs, may only be say like 40%. So you've got to put a lot more energy into those batteries to get a lot less out. So that's one of the reasons why you start seeing some of these emerging technologies being less economic. Now, they're going to improve, they're going to get better over time. But as things stand today, the round trip efficiency of long duration storage is nowhere near the levels of lithium ion.
Okay, thanks. Moving through the list here. Cynthia, you said you have comments on possible gas price sensitivity. And I maybe just have one clarification for Ben on your modeling results comparing level 0 and 1. Is that assuming the base natural gas price forecast?
Yes, so on 0 to 1, that's our base natural gas price forecast.
Okay, and that would underlie the cost differential.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, Cynthia?
I'm sorry, I didn't unmute. My question goes, or comment goes to the sensitivity discussion that we're going to be getting to.
Okay, so you have, all right. I think we're getting through most of the questions here. Some of these are either been covered. I think I want to go next to Josh Smith from Sierra Club.
Hi, this is Josh at Sierra Club. Ben, I don't know if my question has enough to it that you can answer, but I'm curious how or if you mentioned, well, let me back up. In the slide that we're looking at here, the SPS modeling hierarchy, you have a hydrogen conversion towards the end. And presumably you're looking also at CCS retrofits where necessary, where they might be necessary. I'm curious how or if you all are incorporating not just capital costs associated with those retrofits or conversions, but how you're going to be determining variable and fixed costs that go along with that.
Yep. So Josh, I'll start off by saying kind of this is relatively new. I'm not saying carbon capture or hydrogen is new per se, but from our modeling perspective, it's pretty new. So we don't have all of the costs ready to go as it stands today, but our expectation would be, yes, you need to have the capital investment for whatever equipment needs to be done. Yes, you need to incorporate the fixed ongoing cost to operate said equipment, and then also variable costs if you're doing, hydrogen or carbon capture. And then when we look at this stuff, yes, you have to take into account the parasitic load. So my expectation without having those numbers available today was you would have to take into account all of those cost factors and then also adjustments to the technical characteristics, whether that's heat rate, parasitic load. In terms of how are those costs determined? So since our last modeling meeting in Roswell, we have reached out to a couple of the OEMs, a couple of the turbine manufacturers, and they are starting to provide some cost assumptions for carbon capture technologies. We've also had some discussions with some of our customers who maybe know a little bit more about this than us, who are giving us some market information on potential hydrogen costs and whatnot. And then also, as you're aware, there's some publicly available information from like NREL or EEI that would show some hydrogen projections and then also some other kind of capital cost assumptions. So we're going to use publicly available information wherever possible, but we do have some kind of industry experts helping us develop some cost assumptions also.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I don't have any other follow-up questions right now. Just wanting to make sure that that's part of the analysis in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, thanks, Josh. We're winding down to the final few questions. Cynthia, you had one on SPS's gas generation capital costs, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that when I was in Roswell, I did a quick comparison of your gas gen for CT and CC cost, what I had in my notes on P&M, and your cost are half of P&M's. So I assume you stand by your cost, but that at some point the and I guess that you're modeling and that those costs are actually from your utility bill. Is that correct? Is that from utility bill?
Yeah,
C3?
So without seeing P&M estimates, we would have to see them to draw a comparison. But the cost assumptions that we have specifically for the CTs, the S-class CTs, they are based on essentially the units that we built in 2011 and 2013, which Jones 3 and Jones 4.
Oh, okay.
So that kind of forms the baseline of those cost estimates. So yeah, we're pretty confident in the costs themselves. Now, we need to be careful when we kind of draw comparisons to P&M. We're modeling S-class. If they're modeling like H-class, J-class, for example, there should be some differences there. And then also what we started modeling specifically in this IRP is the addition of SCRs, hot side SCRs. So that's actually increased our capital estimates for CTs.
Okay.
So again, we would need to see P&M and see what their assumptions are for environmental controls on CTs.
Okay, and I'm just assuming that then you escalated your 2011, 2012 costs or adjusted them forward. And then the other factor being that you'll be taking gas costs from your RFP. And those may be different from what are your assumptions.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to clarify that last point, we will not be using generic cost CTs as, if we were to proceed with a new gas generator, it would be subject to whatever came in the RFP. So if we modeled $150 million and they came in at 180, that's what we would base our decision on.
Okay, all right, great, thank you.
And somebody who hasn't asked, Carol Lynch, you had a couple of questions in here. So maybe we can finish on that and then transition to the scenario modeling discussion.
Okay, thank you. I'm just scrolling through here. You had a graph with a red and a black line depicting the carbon emissions reductions. And it looks like this graph incorporates some inflection points. So while it decreases overall, there are periods of time where it looks like emissions increase from a potential decrease. And I was just wondering what would contribute to that, or what plans SPS incorporates to account for upticks.
Okay, and I'm not seeing many upticks. I'm seeing maybe it level off slightly. I think essentially 34 to 35 is one where there's
there's like 3 or 4.
Okay, so when you look at that again, there's no requirement within New Mexico that there has to be a continuous reduction in carbon emissions. I mean, they tried introducing that rule in 2021, I think it was, and it never passed. So what we're looking at here is modeling the most economical solution. So you're going to see slight upticks. I mean, new generation additions are lumpy. You're not, if you want to add additional constraints where you can never see the most minor uptick, you could certainly do that, but you'll be adding on customer costs. So, I mean, if that's something we want to, add in as a sensitivity where we never see a 0.5% uptick in carbon reduction, we could. It's just going to end up costing more money.
Okay, and then my other question is related to potential fluctuations as we see normally on a regular basis of gas prices specifically, but other fossil fuels are also they also inherently go up and down. Are those captured and incorporated into the model?
Yeah, we don't have the slide with us. It was actually in the last meeting in Roswell. We intend to do three different sensitivities on natural gas prices. There's kind of there's a subset underneath level 3. Those sensitivities include a low natural gas forecast, a base natural gas forecast, which is what you see today, and then also the potential for a high natural gas forecast scenario. So we will cover 3 natural gas forecasts, low, medium, and high. And then also embedded within our cost assumptions, the natural gas price isn't static. It's based on long-term fundamental forecasts from some pretty reputable sources. So they have that natural increase and decrease in natural gas prices embedded within those assumptions.
Tara, the only thing I would add is that SPS has provided that information. There's a spreadsheet on the GridWorks website that shows at least the base forecast. So you can take a look at that for yourself. And at least in the Roswell meetings, they describe their methods for the low and the high.
That's helpful for you to point out. Okay, well, those are the questions that I have at this point. Thank you for fielding those.
Let's see. I know we want to transition. There've been some posts about some of the storage resources. I think, Athena, you had the last question here on, I guess, it's about carbon capture sequestration, how the upstream emissions are handled.
Yeah, because you'll never get down to 0. Right now, a big problem with just what's going on with climate change is the modeling couldn't include the upstream emissions from waste emissions and accidents. So so how will we get down to 0 with carbon capture if we can't get down to 0 with upstream emissions? Just a consideration. I know it's not included right now because it's not part of the ETA.
Well, I guess that's to clarify for a bit. How are the emissions handled?
I mean, we look at, to Athena's point, we look at downstream carbon emissions. So, I mean, if you start looking at upstream in the entire process, then let's be honest, you can't build wind farms. I mean, wind farms require concrete foundations, concrete creates carbon emissions. So we can't, as a single industry, eliminate all upstream emissions. That needs to come from that electrification of the other industries that hopefully are going to reduce their carbon emissions as well. But if we start looking at saying we have to be up and downstream carbon free, we can't do that without the support of other industries.
Can you at least differentiate between initial carbon emissions, like in building and the wind farms, as opposed to ongoing emissions during use, like operations? Like that's the difference. Is if you're doing carbon capture for a gas peaker plant or whatever gas, then I am concerned about the ongoing fossil fuel emissions, as opposed to building a wind, the concrete foundation, and that's a one-time deal.
So if you're talking about the difference between, let's say, green hydrogen and blue hydrogen, then yes, we can capture those differences in potentially the different carbon emissions within the processes.
Just to keep it in mind.
Let's see. I think, Ben, I'd like to transition now. We've taken a little more time to go through the questions, but we saved it earlier. Next on our agenda was to talk through some of the different modeling requests. And so just want to double check, Ben, you guys are ready for that. Oh, actually, great. Yeah, please reiterate for the group here the preferred means for receiving those requests.
Yeah, so the preferred means is to obviously to visit the link here and submit the form that's on the link. So far, we've only received one form in terms of kind of the official approach.
Hey,
we
Ben.
have seen a couple of emails.
Sorry, I was just going to interlude. In the last 2 days, we've gotten 5 more requests. So over there.
Okay, so Using the form, Sonia?
Yeah, the online form. Yep.
Okay, I'm not sure where they go into.
Into the Teams channel. I can show you later.
Okay, all right. So we've received 5 forms. So I'm prepared to talk about one of them and maybe not the other 4 because they have not made it to my inbox.
Well, okay.
So yeah, anyway, just in terms of the,
go ahead.
Yeah, in terms of the process, if you could just visit this link, fill in the form as we've gone through, obviously select your kind of your assumptions you want to include within your scenario, and then on the comments list, select the changes to those sensitivities. If it's word restricted, in other words, there's like a word count limitation, then what I would suggest you do is still fill the form in, check the boxes that you need to, and then just maybe send kind of an attachment in. If we can do that via the form, great. If not, send it in via email to JMRG.
And Ben, we thought we should announce what is the last date that people could submit these to be considered in your modeling process. I think Zoe had a suggestion for a date, but have you guys talked about it, and can we announce it today here in this meeting?
Yeah, we were really hoping to get all modeling requests in prior to this meeting. With the understanding we've still had a lot of material to present. I think our drop dead date, and Zoe, correct me if I'm wrong, really would be July the 21st.
Yeah, that's correct. July 21st.
Great, thank you. So July 21st, the sooner the better, because there are limited modeling resources, and our team is also working closely together to try to consolidate requests that might have similar basis but slightly different parameters. So we want to try to make this as efficient as possible. So no guarantee for things that come in later, but the sooner the better for consideration of stakeholder modeling requests. Sorry, Ben, I just wanted to add that before you talk about what you've received.
Yeah, we have a little different list here. So Ben, I know that we did receive one, I think it was from Michael Kenny, and I think this has been put in the chat in a few different forms, and I believe was asked in P&M as well, is to model a faster pathway to decarbonization. So one, I think it was 2035 was the date, correct me if I'm wrong. So one, I want to confirm that with Michael and others that have made that request, and then, you know, the SPS's team's feedback on that so far. If we could hear that.
Yeah, so I don't know if Michael's on. I did have a question on his request.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so I believe your request, and I don't have the numbers to hand, but as Jay was just saying, was an accelerated carbon-free or carbon reduction, then carbon-free profile or path. Those don't necessarily tie with the RPS requirements. So as it stands today, the RPS go is a renewable portfolio go through to 2040 and then becomes a carbon reduction go. I just wanted to confirm, Michael, with the scenario you sent, it would be purely a carbon reduction go at each of those 3 milestones that you submitted.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay, we can look at it. I haven't looked in detail, Michael. My expectation is the carbon-free go would almost certainly also meet the RPS requirement, but there could potentially be a discrepancy there, but we can take a look at that report back.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I guess if the RPS requirement requires a lower threshold, then go with that. You know, it still have to meet all the legal requirements. The hope would be to see how would the outcomes vary if you accelerated those requirements. So
I mean, that one in itself, Jay, was pretty straightforward. I think, I don't know if the plan is to go through each of them individually now, but I think what we really need to do, Jay, is wait until the 21st of July, see how many requests we get, see how many of them are very similar to each other, and then try and come up with a reasonable number of modeling runs. So we can certainly address the ones we've received today. I just can't commit today whether we will run those scenarios or maybe we're just going to do a hybrid version of that scenario and maybe another one.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think we also but we did want to use this time, right, in this kind of two channels of communication here. As people are formulating their scenarios by the 21st, I think there's opportunity here to get feedback on that. But to your point, I think in receiving all these, I think the goal is to look together and see, where there are common threads and things can be combined. People are agreeable to that. And then we hope that's not the case, but if there are limitations on Ben's team's time and availability to run everything, we may have to make a down selection. So we're hoping not to do that, but that would be the overall process. I did, Cynthia, since our meeting, time blur, since last Friday, our demand side resource subgroup meeting, you said, you've been working together with folks to formulate a scenario there, and we're hoping to discuss here. So I guess want to open that up and see what further feedback you have.
Okay, let me run through this quickly. And this is developed with Jim Desjardins and Michael Kinney. We would like to develop with SPS a DER sensitivity that has two components. The first component is the aggregation of all DER resources or elements, which the demand response, energy efficiency, PV, EV, DG, and more. And it's akin to the notion or concept of virtual power plants. And Xcel in Minnesota and also Colorado are doing this in some form or fashion. So we would like to do this with SPS, and we'd like to model it for the loads of residential, small commercial, government, municipalities, similar to how Xcel in Minnesota and Colorado are moving forward with VPPs. Okay, and we understand that SPP has, or SPS has, a different service territory. Only 40% of their load is in this retail or in the res small commercial government category, 60% being in the large industrial large commercial. Okay, but we would like for SPS to apply what Xcel Minnesota and Colorado are doing to SPS's 40%, if that makes sense, if they would scale it to that and provide a trajectory over time that is somewhat representative of their parent company. So that's the first element of the modeling of DER. And we're hoping that that, of course, is going to lead to some boots on the ground action items for the action plan period. Then the second component would be for oil and gas and the high tech loads. We would like to look at load shifting and load shedding via, in part, the new standby tariff. And per James made this earlier comment or request. We would like to have a breakdown of the oil and gas and the high tech loads that are current and then projected. And then we'd like to work with SPS and whoever else wants to jump in on this, James, hopefully, as to what would be a reasonable forecast of load shedding and shifting over time. And this is something that we hope that SPS can discuss with Excel Minnesota and Colorado. Rocky Mountain Power and PG&E in California, for instance, are doing a lot with load shedding, load shifting. There may be other industry sources of best practices and case studies that SPS has access to through EPRI or whoever that we don't. So anyway, that is our overall direction of where we'd like to go. Michael and Jim, what did I forget or misstate or not be clear on?
This is Michael. I guess I just want to clarify on the virtual power plant that Excel in Minnesota had some battery pilots, I think really focused on resiliency and microgrid efforts, but with the additional benefit of acting as a little power plant that they started a couple years ago. So just to see how some technology like that could be incorporated into this analysis as a selectable resource. And there's other efforts being made at Rocky Mountain Power and PG&E in California. So just, we'd like to have a dialogue with you guys about how that might be done with the tools you guys have.
Sure. So I've probably got a ton of questions at this time that are probably going to far exceed the time we've got. So let me maybe break this down from the kind of the two categories. On the residential side and the small C&I side, I'll take that away as an action item. I don't speak to our Colorado folks or our Minnesota folks anywhere near as much as I probably should. So I'll have a conversation with those guys, understand what they've done. And then once I'm kind of familiar with what's going on in the northern regions or Colorado and up north, I'll circle back, Cynthia, to you and to Michael and follow up with any questions. Now, on the large customer side and in the C&I side, I think what may be prudent there is maybe to have a small group meeting where we have obviously Cynthia, you guys attend, and then also I would hope that maybe I know we've got Austin from the New Mexico Large Customer Group on. We've got Jeff who's representing Oxy and James who's representing Oxon. Hopefully those guys, could make themselves available and they could provide some vital feedback. I don't want to assume size of programs without kind of their input.
That sounds really great, Ben. You are so accommodating. And
Hi, this is Jim Desjardins. To be quite frank, my interest for the most part lies in the virtual power plant. So I think I will pass on that other discussion, but I think Michael spoke very well about what we're looking for. And so I appreciate that.
I ask it this way. I mean, the drop dead date is the 21st. That's been outlined. And so Ben, you can work with the various stakeholders here in helping formulate these requests. I think that from a process standpoint, there's been what I see are fundamentally two different areas to focus on.
Yeah, we'll work for you, Jay, and through Margie, and we'll try and get some subgroups meeting as soon as possible. The actual start with the large CI side. The model itself isn't particularly complicated, that part of it. Now, getting people to agree on the size, the frequency in load shedding, that's complicated. So we need to get that meeting set up ASAP. The residential side, again, I don't think is particularly complicated from a modeling perspective, but really need to understand what programs are in place and how we would model that. And then Margie mentioned, not Margie, Cynthia mentioned, some actionable items. I would like to speak with Cynthia and others on what those actionable items would be, whether that would be those type of projects bidding into an RFP next year and how we would kind of facilitate that. So there's a lot there to be done, but I think we could get that done in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, Jay, and Ben, a couple things. First of all, we're not at the action plan conversation yet. So that will be later in the process, and I think that the modeling results can inform that. But let's not jump to the action plan yet until we've given due process to the modeling. My other suggestion is that with these scenarios, these additional stakeholder modeling requests that are being formulated, we should find some way to share those with all the stakeholders so that they can see what the parameters are for each of these runs. Like we know there's several people have spoken to the accelerated carbon free. Michael talked to it, but Athena's interested in others. So we probably should find a summary way to get the description, a paragraph or a table or something that lists these requests and their current parameters so that folks can see those and know that their interests are or not being addressed, and we can refine it from that. So we'll work with you to figure out how to best get that summarized so it's visible to people. Were there other requests? I know Jay and Sonia's probably seen some of them, maybe you haven't been. Are there other topical ideas? I know Josh, you turned in some suggested additional model run topics. Should we at least inform the rest of the group what those are at this point? Or Jay, how do you want to continue?
Yeah, I mean, the only other request until this was sent was Josh Smith's request that came in. And I think, I don't know, Ben, some of that detail is going to need, that was a lot. It didn't follow the request form. I think you had certain details. So I think there's going to need to be some processing of that. But I guess if there's, I mean, maybe if you can outline for the group what some of the general requests are, and then, again, this will be an area where we can follow up and see how to address the details here. Is that a good starting point? And then, I'm sure Ben and his team have a lot of details on, or questions on some of your details.
Yeah. Thanks. This is Josh Smith on behalf of Sierra Club. So I submitted a few different ideas for modeling alternatives and runs. I'd be happy, Ben and others, to try to run through at some point how you might determine what the parameters of these sensitivities would be. But I'll just tick through them quickly. First, we would be interested in seeing a scenario in which Tulloch is still retired in 2028, but run on different energy usage patterns in the interim. We believe that SPS should, secondly, we believe SPS should run a sensitivity of some sort, evaluating environmental compliance risks associated with the now finalized Good Neighbor Plan and how those costs will impact existing and new fossil generation going forward. Third, we suggested, depending on how the model is set up and the topography of the model, a sensitivity modeling the impact of high renewable energy penetration under the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, I'm not referring to SPS's acquisition of renewable energy using tax credits available under the IRA, but more referring to how energy market prices would look with a high renewable penetration that you would expect overall energy market prices to decline at least somewhat over the time frame of the IRP. And then fourth, we submitted some suggestions about modeling CCS and hydrogen conversion costs associated with 111D proposals. Some of those details may be too in the weeds for this discussion, but I'd be happy to have further discussions about them.
Yeah, so Jay, maybe to respond to Josh's request, just kind of what I've seen so far, Josh, and I don't want to kind of simplify your request, but there was there were some assumptions or some requests on existing generation, the operation of Toke, the potential operation of Harrington. There was the impacts of 111B and 111D. We haven't received those elsewhere. And then also kind of the questions on the market price forecast. It's an interesting concept, very difficult to quantify because we would have to assume how much generation is being built across the entire SPP balancing authority, but we can certainly talk to you about that. The ones where you talk about or request the hydrogen pricing streams, you know, and carbon capture streams, we have had similar requests from other parties via email. At the moment, we haven't seen official requests. So maybe, Josh, we can kind of have a little email string between some parties and just make sure we consolidate that request into one.
Great. Thanks for that feedback. Happy to have that conversation, and thanks for having us involved today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh.
Let's see. Sonia just posted up the summary of what's been submitted so far. Michael, you've had your hand up, so maybe you have a question or comment, Michael?
Yeah, I guess I was just curious if SPS was considering a sensitivity that looked at implementing dynamic rates, given their grid modernization case looked at the benefits of implementing, say, a system-wide time of use or other dynamic rates, how that would change the shape of the load forecast and thus the resources selected.
Yeah. So I mean, that would definitely be a scenario that we could consider. Cynthia and I actually spoke about this when we were in Roswell. I believe the request for P&M was to essentially do time of use rates as if it was kind of like a demand response program. So you would model it with a reduction in peak hours and then kind of shift that load potentially into other hours. So we've talked about that internally. We've never done that in the past. It would kind of be quite an innovative process. But yeah, we can certainly look at doing time of use rates, but it would have to be approached from kind of a load shifting generator. Then it could be kind of like an actual rate impact on the bottom line, if that makes sense, Michael.
Yeah, I think that's a fine approach to take right now.
Okay, so I think the takeaway from here, between Jim, Michael, and Cynthia, there's a subset of demand DER related sensitivities. We'll continue to finalize those, I think, but that's the core group making the request, correct? Okay, I haven't heard anything further, but I think that's what I thought we
You've
discussed
got
earlier.
it, Jay. Thank you.
Okay, and then we'll process that and make sure we can get something everyone's happy with by the 21st.
Jay, let me suggest the group of Cynthia and James, Austin and Jeff Pollock, or at least Cynthia and James spoke to this. I know it's a complicated scenario, but the oil and gas and high tech load shifting and shedding and standby tariff, would you do a favor, at least just submit a form with as much detail as you're thinking of so that we have it in the record as one that can then be followed up as been suggested. But if we could get that in, that would be super helpful.
And Margie, I just want to note that, and Sonia confirmed that I did put in essentially a request on the virtual power plant. So I can get more into that if need be, but I do have that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jim. I saw that in Sonia's note that they had gotten that one, but we don't have anything in yet for the load shifting and shedding for the oil and gas and high tech scenarios. So Cynthia, can you or
yes, I will.
Thank you so much. Sorry, Jay, back to you.
Okay, I think we've made progress on that topic for now. And yeah, we have a couple slides we want to solicit feedback from the group here. Margie talked about this in the beginning, and you know, in some of the earlier presentations that SPS made, they talked, well, what we saw earlier were the base model runs. There'll be future additional requests on top of this and further refinement by SPS. But you know, as I understood that was a key part of the analysis, but then there's some post-economic, post-processing review that's done in reviewing those results and developing, you know, evaluating the different resource portfolios and developing well, what SPS will ultimately recommend to the PRC. And so they've listed some of these factors here noted on the slide in previous presentations. So I think what we wanted to ask is the group to also offer their feedback on some of these factors. And then I think if we go to the next slide, this set, back one, you'll find these, no, please slide 11. Yeah, there we go. This is an overlapping set of factors, but these are come, as it says here in the reference on the bottom, straight from Appendix A of the IRP rule. This is the direction to the utility on the factors that they should consider in making these selections. So one, we want to put this forward to the group to understand, you know, this is part of the review process, part of the portfolio evaluation. I think we want to encourage your feedback on both the factors themselves. And I think there was discussion in the beginning on, or at least for me, people are going to have different priorities here. And so I think our job, we're not trying to get the group to select one and agree on one set of priorities. I think we want to elicit your feedback on what your priorities are, make sure that SPS is aware of this as they're making their selections. So what I want to be fair about, I think there'll probably be a lot of overlap, but not necessarily on everything. That's a starting point, but we want to use time here and feedback in the coming weeks leading up to the August meeting to get your feedback on these factors and how, you know, how SPS can use them in their evaluation of portfolios. So it's a bunch of material to process. I think we wanted to give some time for the group to offer any questions on this. You can offer your comments in the chat here. We're going to record this and part of the meeting notes. But I think if you have further comments you want to put in writing, I think we have another slide here saying that we request those by July 20. So those can be compiled and brought to SPS in the group, particularly in anticipation of, you know, the next meeting on August 1st and 2nd, and how they'll be used in SPS's evaluation of the modeling results through the end of the process here. So one, Margie, did I do the topic justice? And, you know, this is going on with PNM as well. So we're trying to have, you know, these are going on at the same time. And I think for now, we just want to offer people have questions as well as feedback on any of these topics, any of the factors. I know we're also a few hours into this. So I think that's why we wanted to give people the opportunity to look at the list, reflect on it and put it in writing, you know, but Cynthia has a question, comment.
Let's see. Yes, I'm off mute. Thank you. And can we go back to that slide?
Which, yeah, we have two. There's
Yeah,
this.
thank you.
Yeah.
On
Go ahead.
the price volatility, PRC is interested in gas forecast sensitivity, and I believe we were asked to respond to SPS on this a while ago, and we've been negligent on that. My understanding when I look at that June 13 and 14 gas forecast that you went over with us, Ben and company, it's a 20-year forecast, and you have 2 data points for each year. You have sort of a fall, winter, and a spring, summer data point. And I'm not exactly sure how you apply that gas forecast in the model, but what we were discussing this morning is at least sensitivity that matches the gas price with the gas generation runtime, and that would be assuming that higher prices are associated with the gas gen runtimes. In other words, I'm not sure if the variability we saw in your forecast, the up and down by season on an annual basis, is then averaged out and then just applied to the generation units. If so, we'd like to see actual gas prices during the run times of the generation units matched up. And for instance, you said those units, gosh, 20% of the time for 435 hours. So a more constricted price forecast that I believe would be higher, if that makes, if I've stated myself reasonably correct, or clearly.
Yeah, I've got maybe just a few comments to that one. So the way we do natural gas price forecast is not seasonal. There should be a value for every single month. First of all, so we have a separate gas forecast for January, February, March, etc. And we have that for the full load forecasting period. So we do have that kind of volatility on a month-by-month basis, which is typically when we're forecasting gas prices, is where we see, you know, a spike in winter gas prices compared to summer gas prices, etc. So we capture that volatility. If you're suggesting maybe like an hourly fluctuating natural gas price that's indexed to the output of the specific unit, then we don't see gas prices being that volatile on like an hourly or sub-hourly basis. We're typically entering into contracts ahead of time for certain periods of time. We're hedging against the market, so we just don't see that inter-hour relationship.
Okay, I don't think I was going to get to that detail, but so if you have gas values for every single month, so in a month, but if you have that new fleet of CTs, for instance, and they're only going to run 20% of the time, that's not for a full month, that's for a period, a short period within several months.
Yes, so we model on an hourly basis. So let's just say that CT that's going to run 5% over the course of a year. Let's say it runs for 2 hours in January. We will use the gas price for January of that year for those 2 hours. And then if it ran 6 hours in February, we would use the gas price in February of that year for 6 hours.
Okay, so there is some averaging, because during the month of January and February, the gas price, even though that's often the higher priced gas, but the gas is going to fluctuate in price in that month as well.
Yeah, I mean, so yes, we have forecasted on a monthly basis. We don't have forecast on an hourly basis. Again, that's kind of how we, for the most part, purchase gas, and not necessarily on like an hourly spot market.
Okay.
But we have to have that averaging across the board. I mean, like wind farms have the same sort of averaging assumptions for weather years, solar farms for weather years, loads averaged. Everything is going to be essentially averaged on an annual basis.
Okay. All right.
So,
I want to go ahead, Jay.
Ben, I just want to clarify, it is still in your guys' plans to run, I mean, you talked about sensitivity with higher gas prices, using the higher gas price forecast that had been shared. So that's, you're already on the plan to do that. So that's a question, is that higher gas price sensitivity reflect characteristics, or is there an alternative set of characteristics, Cynthia, that you're looking for? I think that's an open question we can discuss.
Okay, thank you.
Follow up to this, but that is on their agenda so far. And I think, go ahead, Margie.
Yeah, so let's hear from some others about on the factors list. What are the factors that are important to you from the previous slide? And if you have some thoughts about measures to characterize those factors, be interested in feedback from stakeholders on this list? I see, Athena, you've posed a question. Can you translate that to these factors for me?
So what I see is a lot of look at the different modeling for the generation of the load of the power, but is that in response to only one load forecast, or did I miss something? A presentation? Like, is there a high economic growth, a high electrification rate type of thing?
Yep. So we're going to present 3 different load forecasts. So we've got what we're terming a relatively conservative load forecast, which is the financial forecast, we're calling it. We have a slightly more aggressive forecast, which is the planning forecast. And then we're also going to model a load forecast, which we're terming the emerging technologies and electrification load forecast, which would be kind of the high end, the high load forecast. So I think that's your point. We're going to do 3 different load forecasts.
Okay.
I guess this is James. I have a quick comment. I mean, really, when you look at those 7 factors on the screen, plus the additional preamble, it all comes down to cost effectiveness, low carbon, and resilient and reliable. And that's the 3 overarching sort of pillars, I think, that Ben referred to, and the remaining aspects kind of just tie into those and the sort of subcomponents of those 3 factors. And so those are the 3 that ExxonMobil care about.
Super helpful, James. That's the kind of insight we're looking for from each stakeholder, if you have a view on that.
Anyone else want to weigh in while we have some time here? But again, we'd anticipated people may want to step back and process their feedback. So again, you can send the link here, Margie's email address by July 20th, but we don't want to close this off too quickly.
I hear none, James.
I hear none. No, so I can interpret a lot of different things, but we've had a lot of good discussion. I think people's I know where my head's at, and it's well, all the next steps that we have to do here. So I think appreciate everyone's time and thoughts that you've shared so far. And again, send those further comments to Margie, and we can make sure they're recorded in our meeting notes and our records of the facilitation here, as well as informing SPS's work as they do their evaluation and selection of preferred portfolios. With that, Margie, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. Before we shift to looking ahead, I want to ask Zoe, is there anything that you wanted to add regarding this conversation about the factors? I mean, is there anything from your perspective you thought stakeholders should know or pay attention to when we're thinking about these factors? Anything from your end, Zoe?
Oh, not at this point. Thanks, Margie. I might just, if you go back to the slide you were at with upcoming deadlines. I will just note that our deadline to file the IRP is October 15th per the order, just so folks are aware. It might mean that we file the IRP on the 13th to meet that deadline, since the 15th is the Saturday.
Great, thanks for clarifying. You and I had that conversation, and so we'll put on the 13th to make sure that that deadline is met.
I just don't want folks to be surprised.
Good, thanks. We'll fix that. So yeah, speaking of looking ahead, August 1st and 2nd, we've got from the afternoon of the 1st and most of the day on the 2nd, our next very intense and full meeting to process modeling results, to check consensus on the statement of need input, and really begin formulating action plan suggestions. So that will be a very full and meaty meeting. We have decided to host it also on Zoom, though if you are interested in joining SPS in hubs to participate from their hosted venue via Zoom, we'll ask you to contact Linda Hudgens and let you know what your desire is and get more information about that. But the meeting will be virtual on Zoom. We've took the feedback from the meeting in Roswell, we've processed it, we've looked at an evaluation of fairness and opportunity for all stakeholders to participate equally, and decided that a single venue works better than a hybrid venue. So we're going to give you the opportunity to be hosted by the SPS folks in hubs, and we will conduct the meeting on Zoom and not be a hybrid meeting, both in person and in Zoom, but we want to give you the opportunity to join a Zoom team with the SPS hosting that in their facility. So that's our plan for August 1st and 2nd. We'll then have a meeting on August 29th by Zoom, a short one. Again, we'll continue to refine our action plan, probably check consensus on that. And then really the final meeting of this group for input to the IRP is September 21st. As Zoe corrected, the 13th is the due date for the IRP is the 15th. It will likely be filed on the 13th, which is the Friday prior to the 15th. And then we are planning to host one more meeting on the 26th by Zoom also, to get your feedback. How did this process work for you? Are there things that you think should be done differently for future IRPs, etc.? And that will be our closeout meeting of this group in the facilitated stakeholder process. So are there any questions about this schedule before we do one last question of you? Okay, hearing none, we give you all great stamina credits for hanging in this long virtual meeting. Please scan this QR code, or Deb, if you can put the link in the chat, please, so that people can actually fill out this quick survey so that we know what worked for you, what you'd like us to know about going forward. And we are very appreciative of you taking the few minutes to answer these questions. We'll leave this up while the meeting is on for another few minutes so that you can scan the code or go to the link and provide your feedback. And while you're doing that, of course, we can answer any questions that you might have or anything that we've covered today. So we'll do that after thanking very much all of you for being here and sharing your insight and your perspectives. And a big round of applause to the SPS team for their very intense modeling effort, but they're also excellent explanations of how they're going about this and their transparency in the process, which we greatly appreciate. So Ben, Zoe, Sonia, thank you so much for being part of this team and doing such a great job.
Thank you, Margie, and thanks for everyone for attending.
Great, so we'll leave this up for another few minutes, and then after you've filled out that survey, we thank you for your time and we'll let you go for the day. Thank you.